Chapter 442. For people who care about face, a slap in the face is more vengeful than a slap in the face. It also depends on the depth of the person's shrewdness and ability. Nanny Cui, who is only second to a few people in the Guanghan house, has experienced ups and downs. She is a mature woman, but she is anxious to make Shi lose face. Now, after being scolded harshly by this foreign guest, she stretched out her hand to smooth her chest and looked at him carefully. She figured out some of the things that she missed because of her carelessness. In a brothel there are all kinds of crooks and dragons mixed together. Aside from those who wear official robes according to their official status, some of the people who don't act according to common sense are actually more difficult to deal with. Officials protect each other. If one doesn't take care of them well, they can ask for a backer to make up for it. However, the latter is hard to say. How arrogant is Feng Lu? 7 or 8 years ago they angered a fierce god. As a result, 4 courtesans and 6 beauties suddenly died in one night. This murder case shook the Dragon Waste state and it was hard to find the reason. Later, when the Beimang martial arts evaluation was released, it was known that it was done by Zhou Xian, who is ranked 7th among the top 10 devils. Zhou Xian himself is scary enough. His uncle Zhou Xian is one of the 12 great generals of Beimang. The Zhou family is one of the top noble families in the southern imperial court. Feng Lu's guests are all over the dynasty, but they still have to suffer in silence. It is said that after the incident, they even sent a few young beauties to the Zhou family with both hands. Unfortunately, her back is facing the 2 martial arts instructors in the Feng Lu. They heard the words of the young man with the saber and saw that Sister Cui, who has always been bad-tempered, became silent. They thought that they had fallen into a dead end. After looking at each other, they wanted to show off their power. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single day. Since the Guanghan house has a strong backing, they rarely have the chance to fight. As a group of guard instructors who are paid a lot of money every month, they can only spar with each other. It is inevitable that they feel uncomfortable. They want to help Sister Cui gain face for themselves. Anyway, as long as they don't have a direct conflict with Sister Shi, they won't make things difficult for Sister Shi, who usually takes care of their brothers. Although this kind of care is just giving her a smile or stopping to chat, it is an honor for them and they can talk with their brothers. As for Sister Cui, she would only smile at him when she needed his help. She would also reward him with some wine money after the event. However, which of the two was more important? The brothers who came out to make a living and were able to enter Guanghan house all had some ability. They all knew what was important and what was important. Su Fengnian stretched out his palm and swiped the jug of 3 mix yellow wine on the table. The wine jug slid out of the table and drew a pleasing arc in the air. It just so happened that it bypassed the 2 instructors, circled around them and then slid back to the table. It was exactly the same as its original position. This was a technique similar to drawing a circle around the ground, which included Cui Mama, Shi Jiejie Yunzi as well as him and Tao Manwu. The 2 instructors looked at each other in dismay. They knew what was good for them. They could tell that when the wine jug passed by them, it suddenly accelerated. Even if they wanted to punch it with all their strength, they would not be able to catch it. This was not a small trick that anyone could play. Cui Mama was needed for a while, but her face was as usual. She left after a few teasing words. She did not dare to take advantage of the east wind to beat a drowning dog. It could be seen that she was really in danger in Guanghan house now. Shi Jiejie was born as a courtesan. Out of gratitude, she admitted that she was old, so she gave up her position and stayed in Guanghan house to be a nanny who was more noble than a procuress. She was responsible for training the girls with potential in the Guanghan house. Sister Cui was born as a maid and was not favored. She finally became a prostitute, but she was beaten back to her original position because she committed a crime. For the first 10 or 20 years she had been holding back her resentment. It was not easy for her to climb to the position of chief nanny. Shi Jiejie, who had a smooth life, of course regarded her as a thorn in her side. She helped Yunzi up and said softly, "Does it hurt?" Yunzi, who had escaped a disaster, knew that the future would be difficult, but at the moment she was more happy than worried. She smiled and said, "Aunt, it's okay. Yunzi will be scolded and beaten for the rest of my life. I won't die." She patted his clothes and said helplessly, "If Sister Cui can't get along with you and can't take it anymore, you can come and tell me. At worst, I can tell the master to let you do a job in the embroidered ball pavilion. It's just that there will be fewer ways to earn money." Yunzi hesitated for a moment before she forced a smile and said, "Aunt's words are enough. I believe that Nanny Cui is a busy person who doesn't come and go. She won't fuss over minor matters like me." She sighed and said, "Go. I will deal with it here." When the young man left the tea room with a heavy heart, she looked at the young master with a saber and said faintly, "Young master is clever." She thanks young master on behalf of Yunzi. Seeing that elegant young master pretending to be ignorant, she did not say anything. Today's disaster, if the guest in front of her relied on his background and ability to act a little earlier, she and Yunzi would not have a way out. Sister Cui had taught Yunzi a lesson and then provoked the guest verbally. This was unreasonable. She was humiliated verbally by the young man with a saber and then slapped the wine jar as a warning. Although it was not watertight, it could be considered a kind method of forgiving. As a result, Xi's situation could not be worse, but Yunzi would feel much better. Otherwise, this young master would finish eating, put on his clothes and leave. Yunzi would be cleaned up to the point that she wished to die. At that time, even if she wanted to save Yunzi, she would not be able to open her mouth. Su Fengyan picked up the wine jar and put away the banknotes. He said with a smile, "Drinking in the tea room is nothing. Let's go to Sister Xi's place." Xi's face showed slight anger. She bit her thin lips and said softly, "Young master, please forgive me. Xi has not received guests for a long time." Su Fengyan laughed involuntarily and said, "It's just a drink. Does Sister Xi really think that I am greedy for your body?" She had casually said those words to Auntie Cui. Sister Xi thought too highly of herself. "I came here from a study tour. In the past, when I went to the brothel with my friends, I was just a hostess. I played the role of the poor person who paid the money. I have not fought with real swords and spears. I want to drink some wine with Sister Xi first to boost my courage. When I see Miss Wei later, I won't be defeated so easily. Although my family has some money, 200 taels of silver will be spent in the blink of an eye. It is really like the saying, a moment of spring night is worth 1,000 gold. A moment of spring night is worth 200 taels of silver. It is too unfair. Sister Xi, is this the truth?" The corners of Xi's mouth curled up. He was really amused. It turned out that there was such a new saying for a moment of spring night. Not to mention other things, this young master with a saber was definitely straightforward. He was the same towards Sister Cui and Xi. If it was said that she had to repay him with her body because he helped her once, it would be too absurd. She was not familiar with the affairs of the world. She had long passed the age of naivety. In the brothel, it was rare to have the qualifications to ask a girl who was not free to do anything. Even the top courtesan of Guanghan House, Miss Anyang, could not do it. There were one or two in Fengfeng House. The brothel was famous for hiding filth. Which man did not buy meat with gold and silver? It was just that this meat was more expensive than the meat on the butcher's chopping board. A woman's flowery words could not be trusted, but a man's pledge of eternal love could be trusted? She looked deeply into the pair of clear red phoenix eyes. She did not detect the slightest bit of malice. She gritted her teeth and agreed to drink. With her tolerance of 2 caddies of soju wine and not getting drunk, she believed that she would not suffer a big loss. It would not be a big deal if he touched her when she poured the wine. After she thought it through, she said softly, "Young master, follow me to the 4th floor. It is not far from Miss Wei's embroidered ball pavilion." Chapter 443. Walking side by side, Su Fengyan noticed that Xi's fragrance was light and her simple yet elegant attire made her look like a pretty girl from a humble family. Sister Cui was much more exaggerated. Her lips were painted with black paste, her face was painted with yellow powder, and her hair was decorated with a golden hairpin. Her long robe was 4 or 5 inches long, which made Su Fengyan sick of her. She was like a big pot of exotic delicacies. No matter how good one's appetite was, they would be intimidated at first sight. On the contrary, Sister Xi, who had lost her power, was like a small bowl of plain porridge that was carefully added with a few lotus seeds. She was the kind of woman who would be pleasantly surprised if tasted carefully. On the corridor of the 4th floor, there were green gallbladder vases and ink paintings hanging on the wall. It was elegant and unique. However, it was not uncommon to see beautiful maids carrying food boxes and fruit bowls. It could be seen that Guanghan House's business was not bad. When these people saw her, they all obediently called her Sister Xi. She was very popular. Sister Xi smiled and greeted them one by one. After passing through 2 corridors, she came to a room facing a window. She sighed in her heart and said, "Young master, we're here." He pushed the door and entered. The floor was covered with a silk lichen that was extremely labor-intensive. There was a threefold screen that copied the famous painting Snow Banana Double Crane, that separated the sleeping area from the brocade hall. In the front hall, there was a small bed with a delicate pot door and a small table for warming wine and brewing tea. At the corner of the table, there was an incense burner with onions calcined in the Longquan kiln. On the table, there were bowls and other small utensils, especially the black glazed teacups, which were very eye-catching. If one was not an expert in tea, one would not know the rarity of this set of partridge teacups. The emperor of the Southern Tang Empire especially cherished this set of teacups. He once said that the color of the teacups was precious and the color was black. Just these teacups alone could be worth dozens of gold. Su Fengnian sighed in his heart. This sister Shi was really a particular person who knew how to enjoy life. On the bed, there was a jade porcelain pillow painted with lotus flowers. Su Fengnian was somewhat puzzled. It was only the end of spring, this woman was too afraid of the heat. Seeing the young master with the saber staring at the pillow, Shi's face was red and almost dripping with water. She did not dare to look at him directly. She just sat at the small table and skillfully warmed by hand. Before the wine by side, she fondly played with a black glazed tebi by hand and asked, "Young master's accent, are you from Gusai state? Do you recognize this black glazed lamp?" Su Fengnian touched the simple teacup with his fingers and nodded. "My family happens to be in the porcelain business, so I know some famous items in the market. I'm just a small family, so I can't do any big business. I've only heard of the black glazed teacups in the top 10 tea sets, but I've really profited from this trip." Fortunately, he was tactful earlier. Otherwise, if he wanted to take out 200 taels and say something rude to Sister Shi, he would really be asking for humiliation. "However, I only brought less than 1,000 taels of silver with me this time. There are still a few states that I haven't left. I don't have the courage to go to the embroidered ball pavilion anymore. Sister Shi, what do you think we should do?" Shi laughed and said, "Then Gongzi should drink more wine. Drink until you have the courage of a bear's heart and leopard's guts, and then go to the embroidered ball pavilion. Shi, let me warn you first. You have entered the house, you have drunk the wine, you absolutely cannot not go to the embroidered ball pavilion." Seeing Gongzi Qiandao's aggrieved face, Shi's smile widened. She winked and said, "Guanghan Building is not a place to cheat people. If you just want to watch Miss Wei throw the embroidered ball, you can take 1 or 200 taels of silver." Su Fengnian said angrily, "Sister Shi, you say it so lightly. If I only go to the Guanghan Building to look at the embroidered ball and then leave, how can I have the face to ask you for wine in the future?" Shi handed over a cup of wine and said angrily, "It's not difficult for Gongzi to come to the Guanghan Building to ask for wine, but you can only enter the house once." Su Fengnian obediently took the wine and did not make any despicable movements. He took a sip and saw Tao Manwu sitting on the embroidered stool, so he raised the cup to her mouth. The little girl was like a newborn calf that was not afraid of tigers. She took a sip and smacked her lips, enjoying the taste. Su Fengnian found it interesting and simply gave her the whole cup of wine, only telling her to drink it slowly. After that, he left Tao Manwu to the side and allowed her to drink a cup of wine to entertain herself while he chatted with Shi. Both of them could hold their liquor well and were evenly matched. It was probably because Shi had become addicted to talking about porcelain with him. Seeing that this young master with a saber was full of good stuff, she was also a porcelain addict. In addition, the little girl had drunk a cup of wine and was feeling drowsy, so she fell asleep on the small couch behind her. She couldn't bear to wake her up, so she warmed up another pot of wine. The topic was no longer limited to porcelain. The two of them were very smart not to bring up sensitive topics such as one's background. It was unwise for them to talk about such things when they weren't close. Su Fengnian probably knew that the heroic-looking girl in front of him used to be the most popular courtesan in Guanghan House. She was also very popular and was a wonderful person who could compete with the top courtesan of Feng Lu. However, no matter how beautiful a woman was, she could not withstand the knife of time and men's love for the new and dislike for the old. She was disheartened and tired of flattery, but she did not have the fortune to meet a good man that she liked. There was once an official who wanted to take her as a concubine, but she did not want to live under someone else's roof and be troubled by the first wife for the rest of her life. Therefore she became a nanny who taught Qingling. The decorations in her room that were worth more than 200 gold were all the money she earned in her early years. She had no relatives or friends and she did not bring them with her when she was born. Therefore she simply exchanged the gold and silver for her favorite treasures in order to be pleasing to the eyes. Guanghan House was very preferential to women who had been a prostitute but were slowly getting older. The drunk Tao Manwu woke up in a daze. She seemed to have choked on something hard and was not sleeping well. She picked up the object and looked at it, her eyes blank. It was a small ruyi made of jade. This ruyi was the same ruyi used to make lonely women feel happy. Su Fengnian knew this, so he said calmly, "Peaches are used to knock on the back. Put it away and go back to sleep." The little girl replied with an "oh," and put the jade ruyi back to the bed. She then fell asleep. He pretended to be calm. Her eyes were blurred and her cheeks were pink. She tilted her head slightly and took a sip of wine. Su Fengnian chuckled and said, "Sister Shi, why are you shy? It's normal for a man to be full of vigor. It also shows that Sister Shi is clean and honest." Shi's charming eyes were like silk. She said hatefully, "You're still talking about it?" Su Fengnian held back his laughter and considerately changed the topic. He asked, "When I went to the city I talked to shopkeeper Sun about the 4 freaks of the Flying Fox City. I know that there's a strange man who sells swords, paints and sleeps in brothels. Sister Shi, do you know him?" She hesitated and said self-mockingly, "I know him. I even asked him to draw a portrait. Of course I remember this swordsman. But he painted no less than 100 pictures in those years. I'm afraid he doesn't remember me." Su Fengnian frowned and said, "How can such an interesting person disappear just like that?" She took the wine cup to cool her hot cheeks. She sighed and said, "I heard some news about him. He was dissolute and became a bearded sloppy man. He couldn't sell any more paintings but he still had to live. It seems that he went to the city magistrate's mansion to be a swordsman. Young Master Tantai's swordsmanship should be taught by him. I don't think his life is too shabby. But he's no longer the top scorer of the brothel in the eyes of us prostitutes. That dissolute man who slept on the top of Feng Feng Lu is dead." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Sister Shi likes this top scorer." She smiled and shook her head. She said softly, "I just admire his dissolute and affectionate nature. I don't like such a man who is destined to be lonely. Dissolute can't be eaten." Su Fengnian reverted to his old attitude and said harshly, "He wants to be both dissolute and stable. In the end he likes dissolute men who can make money. Maybe he has the ability to be more dissolute than that ruyi." She was stunned for a moment and then laughed charmingly. "So what if he's a young master?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "He's quite good." Sister Shi didn't believe him. Su Fengnian asked, "He's more dissolute than your ruyi. Sister Shi, do you like him? Is the ruyi dissolute?" She spat and scolded with a smile, "Little rogue." Su Fengnian corrected her, "Wrong. He's a big rogue." Chapter 444. Dirty talk was probably the best tonic to warm up the relationship between men and women. Of course, the premise was that the man and woman did not dislike each other at the beginning. She invited the young master with a saber into the house largely because of the situation. After drinking 2 pots of wine and a few teasing words, she finally felt some warmth that had nothing to do with the ways of the world. This was attributed to the decent manner of the scholar with a saber in front of her, and the fact that he had a simple child with him. It made him seem more pleasing to the eye compared to the rough brothel patrons who would tear off their faces after entering the brothel. In the brothel, even the refined scholars would look at the women after they took off their clothes. Su Fengnian accidentally got the information he wanted and was ready to get up and leave the house. After going to the embroidered ball pavilion, he could leave the Guanghan building. Whether he could follow the vine to find the top scholar who sold the sword, and whether he was related to the man Su Xiao wanted him to find would depend on fate. Shi's ability to observe people's expressions was perfect. Seeing that he did not have the intention to pester her, she was relieved but also a little disappointed. After all, she was old and no longer had the beauty that could make men crazy. She stood up with Su Fengnian and saw that the little girl on the bed was sleeping coquettishly. She was happy from the bottom of her heart and smiled. "Young master, if it's not presumptuous, I will give the little girl a porcelain pillow. The little girl's name is Shi, and her name is similar to mine. It can be considered fate." Su Fengnian was surprised. Sister Shi is really willing to give it to her? She threw a coquettish glance and said coquettishly, "If young master wants a black glazed cup, she will not be willing to give it to her. I will give her a porcelain pillow that is not worth much." Consider it as forming a good relationship with the little girl. I am willing to give it to her. Su Fengyan sighed. Sister Shi is so considerate. It is disrespectful to accept it. If there is a chance in the future, I will definitely return the gift. Shi waved his hand and smiled. Don't. I don't have any ulterior motives for giving the little girl a porcelain pillow. If you return the gift, you will be at a disadvantage. Su Fengyan didn't insist. He thought that if he could safely return to Baoyang, there was a set of black glazed lamps in the prince's mansion that the late emperor of southern Tang had held tightly to before his death. Could be said to be an immortal item. If there was a chance, he wouldn't mind giving it to this good-natured brothel girl. In any case, leaving it in the prince's mansion would be a waste of natural resources. Top-quality tea sets were similar to some priceless tea pets. If they were placed on a shelf and not touched by people or soaked in tea for a long time, they would lose their spiritual energy. It was the same principle as how people raised jade. However, there was no harm in not talking about this kind of unsettled matter at the moment. He walked over and pinched Tao Manwu's little nose. She was as sleepy as other girls her age and had a bad temper when she woke up. When her nose was pinched, she would randomly punch and kick. Su Fengyan had a hard time teasing her awake. When Tao Manwu saw that it was Su Fengyan and not her parents, the little girl suddenly lowered her head and burst into tears. Su Fengyan didn't console her and said softly, Taozi, wake up. Sister Shi saw that you are cute and gave you a porcelain pillow. Quickly thank her. Tao Manwu wiped her cheeks with her sleeve and looked up with a smile. Thank you, Aunt Shi. Shi's heart softened and she said softly, good girl. Su Fengyan took out a few banknotes and put them on the table. He held the little girl who was hugging the porcelain pillow and said apologetically with a smile, I won't disturb Miss Wei today. Here is the deposit. I will come back tomorrow. Our Taozi has a bad temper when she wakes up. If I don't let her sleep well, she won't be happy for the next few days. She didn't have time to be rude and said softly, why don't you go to Miss Wei's embroidered ball pavilion and let the little girl sleep here? She added flatly, if you don't find it dirty. Su Fengyan shook his head. He noticed that his sleeves were being pulled. Seeing the reluctance in the eyes of the little girl in his arms, Su Fengyan frowned. The two girls, one big and one small, became nervous. Of course, Su Fengyan didn't want Tao Manwu to stay together with Joy, who had cultivated into a spirit. If there was any mistake, Su Fengyan would kill him without hesitation. However, how would they know about the inside story that was filled with thick blood qi? As they wished. How many people and how many things were as they wished? Su Fengyan, whose hearing wasn't inferior to that of a top crypt master, slightly trembled. As expected, unpleasant things came knocking on his door. Su Fengyan forcibly suppressed the killing intent in his heart. He didn't know why, but after the death battle with the demon Xie Ling at the Duckhead Green Inn, he didn't draw his saber and gained enough energy. The saber will in the scabbard skyrocketed, but the killing intent in his heart also rose. However, Li Chungang had already retired from Jianghu and wasn't by his side. Otherwise he would definitely ask whether this was good or bad. Su Fengyan was really worried that when the time came he wouldn't be able to raise the dragon-slaying saber will and become a demon who killed people like flies. Su Fengyan silently recited the chant of the Great Yellow Court and calmed his mind. He looked at the door and heard a hurried knock. Su Fengyan was surprised. Other than Wei Monxiu, who she regarded as her daughter, no one else would come and Shir's knock wouldn't be so stiff. Su Fengyan took a deep breath and went to open the door. She saw Sister Cui with a playful smile. Su Fengyan also had a thunder pool that she couldn't touch, and this room was it. Just as she was about to speak with a cold face, she saw a tall woman dressed as a man standing behind Su Fengyan. Su Fengyan suddenly stopped and swallowed her words. She respectfully bowed and said, Su Fengyan greets the third miss. The woman, who didn't have the appearance of a charming and graceful woman, was quite heroic. She wore a jade belt brocade robe like a rich man and had a long saber hanging on her waist. She said unhappily, it's the third young master. Su Fengyan's mouth was bitter. She lowered her head and said, Su Fengyan greets the third young master. The backer behind Guanghan Tower had come. To be precise, it was the backer's sister. People couldn't imagine that Guanghan Tower was opened by the second young master of the Flying Fox City. This semi-public secret was only known by the upper class of the city. The dragon had 9 sons and the lord of the city had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son Tantai Chongping was brave and heroic. He was also good at writing beautiful poems. He was destined to be the most popular scholar in Beimang in the future. Once he became the bell chaser, he would be the most popular person in the royal court around the emperor. He would be like a bright moon jumping out of the tide and enter the vision of the top nobles in Beimang. The whole Flying Fox city was waiting to see him. But the second young master of the city, Tantai Chang'an, was a complete debauchee. He wasn't proficient in literature or martial arts, but he ate, drank, whored, gambled, trained eagles, led dogs and fought crickets. He was proficient in everything. Just in the breeding and trading of crickets, he had spent no less than 3,000 to 4,000 taels of silver. Because the second young master of the city loved to fight crickets, every year starting from the 7th month, it was unknown how many idle hoodlums would scour the city for crickets. They hated that they couldn't dig 3 feet into the ground to catch a fighting cricket worth several dozen taels of gold. It was no wonder that people joked that Flying Fox City had a 5th freak. The young daughter of the city overseer, Tantai Kongho, did not like women in makeup but loved weapons. She frequently fought in the bustling streets. Practically all of the city's hoodlums, big and small, had suffered. They already recognized her appearance, and when they saw her they would take a detour, not giving her the opportunity to beat people up. The one standing in front of Shi was Tantai Kongho. Looking over Shi's shoulder, she saw Su Fengnian and said in a strange tone, "Shi, I heard that you brought an extraordinary guest into the embroidered ball pavilion and even showed off your skills in front of Mama Cui." This young master went to the embroidered ball pavilion to take a look, but there was no sign of him. "I didn't expect that he really was here." Shi, I previously heard second brother say that you were the most authentic in the Guanghan Tower. Why do I feel that this is not the case? First you secretly took the job and now you're eating it yourself? Didn't you cut the silk in accordance with the brothel's rules and no longer receive guests? You made an exception for such an unremarkable young man? Have you gone crazy thinking about men? I heard Mama Cui say that these past few years, you've mostly used Sir Yu Rui to pass the spring. How about you let this young master gain some experience?" This influential woman's imposing manner was overbearing, without the slightest bit of misgivings. Every sentence pierced the heart and bone, each word piercing the spine. She forced a smile and said, "I only drank 2 pots of wine with this young master and did my best to entertain guests." She did not receive any guests. If there truly is a day when she makes a comeback, she will certainly first inform the third young master before daring to act. Mama Cui clicked her tongue and said, "Little sister Shi is truly an honest person. She deserves to be called a loyal woman who will dedicate her life to the Guanghan Tower." Tantai Kongho angrily rebuked, "Shut your mouth. You don't have the right to add insult to injury. He is not a good thing. You're the same as her. If she's lacking, how much better can you be?" Mama Cui stammered, keeping quiet out of fear. Su Fengnian, who was watching from the sidelines, laughed in his heart. "Don't look at this little girl's poisonous mouth. She actually knew how to be impartial. She wasn't the kind of stubborn young girl who would listen to the wind and listen to the rain." Mama Cui's move of fanning the flames was a profit, but the profit was limited. Chapter 445. Tantai Kongho pointed a finger at Su Fengnian. "You are a guest. Even if you break the rules, it is Guanghan House's fault. This young master will not bicker with you, but I heard you have some skill. I just happen to have a servant at my side who knows a bit. If you can withstand 10 moves, then for the next 3 days and 3 nights, aside from Anyang Qingyu and Wei Manxiu, those 3 red cards, you can play with any woman in the house as you please regardless of day or night. You can play with as many as you can. If you can sleep with 100 women, then that is your skill. Guanghan House will admit defeat. How about it? As long as 10 moves, this young master is famous in Flying Fox City for keeping my word. Do you dare?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I don't dare. Third young master's retainer is an expert at a glance. I am only a poor wanderer who came to Guanghan House to find Miss Xue Ling. If I am beaten down by third young master's people as soon as I make a move, I fear I will dampen third young master's mood." Tantai Kongho was flattered. In fact, she was slightly happy in her heart, but her face was still frosty. She disdainfully said, "Don't dare? Are you a man with a gun?" Su Fengnian remained unmoved, making Mama Cui extremely disappointed. She said without any backbone, "If third young master says yes, then yes. If he says no, then no." Tantai Kongho completely lost interest. She was overflowing with interest to teach a lesson to a big green-skinned hoodlum with dozens of underlings, but bullying unarmed and defenseless commoners or those embroidered pillows was truly meaningless. Not to mention her 2 elder brothers would also be unhappy. Sighing, she turned and left, muttering, "Your father and mother gave birth to you, this son, in vain. Without a gun, other than barely carrying on the family line, what can you accomplish?" The robust retainer's expression suddenly changed. He stood in front of the 3rd young miss to protect her, shouting, "Careful." Tentai Kongho was bewildered. She looked at the personal retainer who seemed to be facing a great enemy. She knew this guy's background. He was a genuine expert that the city overseer manor had hired for 3,000 taels. His father was reportedly an external martial arts grandmaster not far from first rank. In Dragon Waste Province's central region, his family had a long history of learning. He had established his own school, and he had long enjoyed a great reputation. Like father, like son. This retainer also had strength close to 2nd rank. The retainer stared fixedly at the young man who did not draw his saber. He was also at a loss as he clearly felt a great murderous intent just now. When he was young, his father was at the peak of martial arts and was full of pride. He happened to ask a Vajra realm immortal who was passing by the Dragon Waste state for guidance. In the end, he was defeated in 3 moves and the onlookers all felt suffocated. He still remembered that after the immortal's 2 moves of humility, the 3rd move was a majestic murderous intent. It was as if the river was flowing in reverse and he was swaying unsteadily like a lone boat. However, this young swordsman in front of him clearly had a calm demeanor and did not have the slightest bit of dignity. Where did the strong killing intent come from? Tentai Kongho, who liked to reason with people, frowned and said, "My father always said that every time there is a major event, there must be calm. This is still nothing, yet you can't keep your cool?" The retainer with his keen 5 senses revealed a bitter smile. After he confirmed that there was no abnormality, his taut muscles gradually relaxed. The 2 loops of clothing around his arms visibly bulged and returned to being ironed. He said in a low voice, "This little one worried too much." Su Fingyan, who was holding Tao Manwu, stood at the doorway. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Shi and said with a smile, "I thought about it and still felt that I should be bold enough to attempt to exchange blows with the expert at the 3rd young master's side. After all, the reward that the 3rd young master gave was too enticing." Tentai Kongho glared at the retainer and angrily said, "Look at you. You're being looked down upon." The retainer's heart immediately rose to his throat. If the young swordsman had blindly retreated from beginning to end, then it would have been fine. He could have treated it as a misconception. However, this fellow had played a trick of retreating first and then advancing. If he truly targeted the 3rd young miss, he truly did not have absolute certainty that he could protect his master. It did not matter if he was defeated. At most, it would damage the prestige of his father's sect. However, if he allowed the 3rd young miss to receive the slightest injury, with the city overseer's mansion's city overseer's protectiveness and the 2 young masters pampering, he would no longer be able to mingle around in Flying Fox City. Taking a deep breath, the sturdy retainer narrowed his eyes and said, "Exchanging blows is fine. Young master, please find a spacious courtyard with me. It will also be convenient for you and me to exchange blows to our heart's content. We won't have to be afraid of bumping into things inside the building and injuring unrelated people. How about it?" Su Fingyan nodded and said, "Okay." She lightly stepped on his foot, her eyes full of anxiety. Su Fingyan hugged Tao Manwu with one hand. His other hand stealthily extended and lightly patted Shi's buttocks. Shi's figure was somewhat thin. In fact, the places that should have been round and perky were not missing a single point. Her body trembled and her pair of beautiful limpid eyes widened. Fortunately, everyone, including Tentai Kongho, was attracted by his face. They did not notice this big pervert who had the guts to take advantage of her. If this was seen by the lawless Tentai Kongho, they reckoned that she would certainly sigh in admiration. This was the real deal, having a calm demeanor whenever something big happened. Su Fingyan handed Tao Manwu over to Shi, who was painstakingly hiding her shame and indignation. He softly said, "Let Taozi stay with you for now. It's not good to let a child see fighting and killing." Shi silently took the little girl. However, it was not tender feelings but rather a murderous look. Su Fingyan did not pay attention to her. He made a shushing gesture towards Tao Manwu. The little girl was worthy of being called telepathic. She nodded. Mama Cui could not suppress the ecstasy in her heart. This young man did not know when to advance or retreat. Did he really want to sleep with 100 girls in Guanghan House? But the retainers at the third young master's side had frightening skills. Several dozen ruffians simply could not get close to them. You, a young man with a physique only slightly better than a weak scholar, wanted to withstand 10 moves. If you were lucky enough to survive, you would have to lie in bed for several months. Even if the girls took off their clothes and swayed in front of you, would you be able to get up from your crotch? While she was secretly delighted and thinking, she suddenly raised her head and saw the young master behind the third young master and his retainers turn his head and smile at her. She did not know why, but she was frightened. Su Fengnian absent-mindedly followed behind. He walked down Guanghan House and walked towards the lake in the rear courtyard. He did not care about the constant addition of personal guards and retainers along the way. When dealing with a third-rank retainer, he only cared about the propriety. He was more concerned about the entanglement behind the governor of Flying Fox City. The north and south of Beimang were gradually intertwined in the confrontation. Apart from the complicated genealogy of the Yelu and Murong royal families, the ones who really stood at the top of this dynasty were only the 8 provincial governors and 12 generals of the border governors, as well as the dozen or so officials of the southern dynasty who had the right to speak in the court. These 30 or so people each represented a tangled and complicated power. They were either connected by marriage, fought to the death, cooperated with each other, or did not have any contact with each other. It was very difficult to sort them out. As far as the officials of the southern dynasty were concerned, they were generally supported by 2 skeletons. One was the aristocratic group known as the Noble Clan of Longguan. They were stubborn, conservative, and self-righteous. They were not inferior to the aristocratic families of the Old Spring and Autumn period. After the Spring and Autumn period war, the aristocratic families of Longguan in the north of Beimang became even more arrogant. They considered themselves to be the orthodox aristocratic family. The Zhong family, which produced the great demon Zhong Liang, was one of them. One of them was the military power led by 3 generals. The other was Huang Songpu, who was of the same rank as the provincial governor in Gusai state. He was a remnant of the Spring and Autumn period. Originally, the scholars in the south of Beimang dynasty, no matter if they were native scholars or remnant of the Spring and Autumn period, were all civil officials. Only those in the north could become generals and ministers. It was the amazing Huang Songpu who took the lead. After that, there was General Lu Gui, who was praised as half of Su Shao by the Empress of Beimang, and Yang Yuanzhan, who was born a pariah but rose rapidly in the military world. These 3 generals with outstanding military achievements were almost all piled up in the straight line to the north of Gusai state. It could be seen that Beimang attached great importance to the Western Front. The governor of Flying Fox City, Tantai Jinyu, was the legitimate son of the great aristocratic Tantai family in Longguan. He had a tradition of marriage with another aristocratic family, the Yuan family, which had lasted for 500 years. Everyone in the Liang dynasty knew that there was a saying of scholars migrating north. There were 2 torrents. One flowed into the group of scholars in Jiangnan, and the other flowed into the furnace of the old aristocratic families in the north. What they didn't know was that there was an even larger group of scholars that were fleeing north. They were like carps crossing the river into the Beimang dynasty. Other than those who couldn't acclimatize and died young, most of them started to integrate into the Beimang dynasty. This was especially true for the officials of the southern dynasty who started to stand out. The 3 generals Huang, Lu, and Yang were among the outstanding ones. There were also many remnant of the Spring and Autumn period scholars who relied on their true abilities to occupy important positions in the officials of the southern dynasty. These people lost their country and families and left their homes. As long as they were alive, there wasn't a day that they didn't want to go south. What was the first obstacle to going south? It was Bailiang and Su Shao, who was even more famous than the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry. To the north of northern Liang, a powerful and restless dynasty stared at the Liang dynasty with a ferocious aura like a tiger. In the future, Su Shao might be this young man walking by the Jiaqing Lake. Chapter 446. In the area of Jiaqing Lake's Bottle Alley, every willow tree on the lakeside had a large red lantern hanging from it. Visiting the lake at night was as bright as day, convenient for a few brothel patrons who were fond of wild mandarin ducks playing in the water. It could be seen that Bottle Alley solicited business. However, the man who lingered in Bottle Alley tonight apparently did not have this kind of abnormal hobby. Jiaqing Lake was tranquil and peaceful. Tantai Kongho led him to a waterside pavilion with a horizontal board with the words, "Connecting Water and Sky." She carelessly imitated that boorish martial artist and sat down. She extended a hand indicating that they could compete in martial arts. She naturally did not favor that pretentious man with a saber. Her family's servants' weight was very sufficient. Don't look at the fact that above third rank there were second rank and fourth rank first rank. Third rank martial artists roamed Jianghu. Although they could not be said to be tyrannical, they rarely met a worthy opponent. After all, second rank and first rank peak experts had the reservedness that peak experts should have. On one hand, they did not easily reveal themselves if they did not have the opportunity. On the other hand, they disdained to take action. The demon lord Xieling had the mentality of a young man watching a child throw a tantrum. He was never willing to interfere as it did not benefit his martial cultivation at all. The higher the realm, the more it tested his patience and perseverance. He could not afford to slack off for even a moment. Especially when he had stepped into the first grade, it was like the gates of heaven had been opened wide. It was like a long scroll of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers had been unfurled, and everyone was intoxicated by it. The characters outside the scroll were like chickens and dogs, and the scenes outside the scroll were unbearably vulgar. Murong Kongho, who originally thought that she could settle this matter in a few moves, saw her retainer earnestly lift his robe and tie it around his waist. He stepped out and his hand made an inviting gesture. She subconsciously leaned forward, her heart somewhat astonished. Could it be that she had truly caught a big fish? Otherwise, how could this normally arrogant personal guard of the city overseer's mansion be so serious? The personal guard who had reached a higher level in external martial arts was not impatient to take action. He said in a low voice, "My family's ancestor Yang Huking was taught by the Central Plains Xiongyi Fist's 12th generation grandmaster Fu Qiujian. After returning home he created his own dragon-bearing fist. Although it is regarded by the world as an external martial art, it is actually an internal and external dual cultivation. My father once killed the enemy in the army and made some improvements. Therefore he is particularly adept at short fights. His actions are ruthless and he absolutely does not adhere to the views of the world. If he makes an unreasonable move, young master should not be surprised." Su Fingyan smiled and nodded. Just like him, he stepped forward and stretched out his hand, treating him with respect. The impatient Tantai Kongho rolled her eyes. This Yang Dianqing was truly fussy. Finishing a few moves was enough to finish the job, yet he insisted on being so serious. This young master has made an appointment with second brother to go to Anyang to listen to the zither. She had no choice but to shout, "Hey hey hey, are you two done yet? You're even chatting. Turns out you've met old friends in a foreign land. Hurry and be quick about it for this young master. A loss is a loss and a win is a win. There's no need to be so polite." The city shepherd estate's retainer Yang Dianqing took the initiative to attack. He sent a straight punch, his lower body steady and solid. His feet kicked up bursts of dust from the ground and his entire body was like a twisted rope. Could be seen that he was nurturing an astonishing explosive force. This was the first time Tantai Kongho had seen him use his full strength. Her eyes were wide open and she was brimming with vigor. It was just as she said, the one surnamed Yang had some real skill. She saw that youth with a saber pressed down on the simple and unadorned short saber's scabbard with his left hand, and he used his right arm to meet the enemy. Yang Dianqing was clearly dissatisfied with this youth's conceit. His fists were compact, taut and instantaneous, twisting and drilling. His body and footsteps blended into one and he arrived in a flash. Su Fingyan's right hand lightly patted Yang Dianqing's twisting fist on his chest. His body slid back 2 steps, giving him the opportunity to scatter and gather his fist's energy, and he also gave himself space to maneuver. Yang Dianqing's fist struck empty air. Sure enough, it was as he said. His family's inherited fist technique did not stick to one pattern. He aimed a vicious kick at this young master's crotch. Su Fingyan bent his knee and raised his leg. With a perfect sideways swing, he lightly swept away the swift and fierce offensive. Yang Dianqing could practically be called taking advantage of the situation, twisting his body like a bow. He soared into the air and his leg whipped out swiftly and violently. Tantai Kongho clapped her hands and cheered. Su Fengnian still used his right hand, his palm blocking the whipping leg. His body retreated a step, imperceptibly dispersing the force. However, he did not loosen his grip. After he stuck, his body spun, and he practically carried Yang Dianchen on his shoulder. He spun in a large circle and Yang Dianchen was flung away. Yang Dianchen floated to the ground, his feet rooted to the ground. There was no sign of defeat. Tantai Kongho, who wished for the whole world to be in chaos, called out, "Good." In her opinion, this battle of martial arts could not be said to have a clear victory or defeat. It was merely that the saber-wielding young man's strange technique, using defense as an attack. Fortunately, he had not been defeated 1,000 li away. She admired Yang Dianchen's carefree and unrestrained fast and fierce attacks. Watching it was a feast for the eyes. Yang Dianchen was self-aware. After several moves, let alone that his offensive was like a tide, in fact, each time he attacked according to this young man's intentions. If the opponent truly wanted to be ruthless, whether or not he could last 10 moves would depend on luck. Just as he was about to grit his teeth and use the killing move of the dragon manifestation fist, a mellow voice that was no different from the sounds of nature entered his ears. "Don't fight, don't fight. Under the moonlight, the two of you are both experts. Heroes should appreciate each other. Fighting with your lives on the line will only spoil the scenery. Kongho, if you continue to cause trouble, second brother will not accompany you to listen to the zither." Su Fengnian and Yang Dianchen looked at each other and smiled knowingly. They both withdrew their hands and the latter cupped his fist in gratitude. With Yang Dianchen's status as the city overseer's mansion's guest, it could be considered giving this saber-wielding young man enough face. Su Fengnian was all too clear about the many customs of these martial artists. For Yang Dianchen, who had both a backer and a family background, to be able to reach this step was not easy at all. He also meticulously cupped his fist in return. "That's it?" Tantai Kongho, who finally had something to watch, was clearly very dissatisfied. Her eyes widened and she indignantly looked at the white-robed hedonistic young man carrying the birdcage. She shouted, "Second brother. What's wrong with you? You're helping an outsider and you won't even allow me to find some fun. In the end, are you really my second brother? I was actually picked up by father and mother, so you don't feel sorry for me at all, right?" The white-robed young man wore a smile as he stood by the lakeside. He carried a birdcage woven from purple bamboo and raised a rare dragon-tongued sparrow. He was approximately 25 or 26 years old, and his face was like a crown of jade. He was extremely handsome and his appearance could make a young lady scream. Compared to His Royal Highness's true appearance, it was somewhat lacking. However, compared to the current Su Fengnian who wore his face, it was much more outstanding. His younger sister's rude and unreasonable behavior truly gave him a headache. He angrily smiled and said, "My little grand, please spare me. Can't you just treat me as if I was picked up?" Tantai Kongho's mouth was unforgiving, but facing this relative, her tone clearly carried a lot of affection and playfulness. There was not the slightest bit of coldness. She trotted out of the waterside pavilion and arrived in front of her second brother. She put her hands on her hips and pouted, feeling wronged. "Nonsense. You and big brother are twin brothers. If you were picked up, wouldn't father and mother only have me as their biological daughter?" Tantai Chong'an, who was Flying Fox City's #1 debauchee but did not have a bad reputation, had a warm smile in his eyes. He stroked his younger sister's head and said with a wry smile, "You if these words were heard by your big brother, see if he doesn't ruthlessly sort you out. It's only because I dote on you more than that bookworm that I won't get angry with you. Come, let's see who in the family loves you the most. If you're right, second brother will give you a pleasant surprise." Tantai Kongho's eyes smiled like crescent moons. She pulled on her second brother's arm and giggled. "It's definitely second brother. There's no running away." The handsome young master laughed heartily and tapped her forehead. "I clearly know that you, this girl, don't have a conscience. When you get to that bookworm's side, you'll be a fence-sitter and change your tune. However, hearing this still makes second brother happy. I had the servants prepare plum blossom porridge for you in the courtyard. The plum blossom stamens were all personally picked by second brother during the late spring. There were several times when I fell down from the tree, but I didn't dare tell you." Tantai Kongho hugged her second brother and excitedly said, "I knew second brother would treat me well. In the future I won't marry, I'll be your wife." Tantai Chong and flicked his finger at his blabbermouth younger sister and pretended to be angry. Not marrying is fine, but to be second brother's wife, what a scandal. Letting his younger sister help hold the birdcage, he did not forget to warn her, whose eyes were quietly turning, that if she dared to secretly release the dragon's tongue sparrow, she would not be able to drink the plum blossom porridge. Seeing her dispirited face, Tantai Chong and smiled and looked towards Su Fengyan. After bowing with clasped hands, he sincerely apologized. Tantai Chong, and apologizes to this young master on behalf of my mischievous younger sister. Her temperament is actually very good, but she's a bit mischievous. She won't grow up. Young master should not take it to heart. I heard that young master wants to see Wei Manxiu. If you don't mind Chong An's superfluous recommendation, I'll go with young master to the embroidered ball pavilion. Su Fengyan smiled and shook his head. Tantai young master cannot muster so many people. Tomorrow I will come to Guanghan building again. I won't trouble you. Tantai Kong Ho curled her lips and said, you really don't know what's good for you. Seeing Tantai Chong and turn his head and stare, she stuck out her tongue and stretched out her finger to tease the dragon's tongue sparrow that was more vivid than a high-grade parrot. As soon as she said that the third young master's martial arts were matchless, the sparrow followed suit. Sure enough, its voice was exactly the same as a real person. The childlike Tantai Kong Ho could not help but laugh. Su Fengyan softly laughed and said, good bird. The sharp-eared Tantai Chong, and unexpectedly shyly looked towards his own crotch. His face was full of emotion as if 1,000 cups of wine were too few to drink with a bosom friend. Young master has a discerning eye. Scope. If you don't mind, let's drink a few cups to our heart's content. Not allowing Su Fengyan to refuse, Tantai Chong, and quickly stepped forward, pulled his arm and walked towards Miss Anyang's small courtyard. He eagerly said, young master may not believe it, but Chong and feels close to you as soon as I see you. Seeing Su Fengyan's strange expression, Tantai Chong and laughed and said, rest assured I don't have a homosexual fetish. Although it's not to the extent that I can't be happy without a woman, I can't wait to be a real man who can sleep with 10 women at night. However, some time ago I made a bet with a family friend's disciple. I gambled on the bellies of women at Feng Feng Lu and hurt my body. During this time, seeing beautiful women is like seeing scourges. However, for the time being I still have no interest in men. Young master, rest assured. Su Fengyan bluntly said, I'm not assured. Chapter 447. Tantai Chong, and did not laugh angrily, and his laughter was hearty without the slightest gloominess. This playboy who was known for his frivolity, seemed to have a natural intimacy. It's easy to deal with honest people. Then I'll go with the flow and say things first, saving young master from thinking too much. If Chong and likes someone, as long as he doesn't have bad intentions, even if he punches me or scolds me, it's a good thing. I may have a bad face at the moment, but I will certainly regret it afterwards. If young master really becomes Tantai Chong An's bosom friend, please forgive me. Su Fengyan followed him into the secluded courtyard where the tea cooled down and changed to hot tea. He bluntly said, isn't second young master's bosom friend too worthless? You want to make friends with whoever you see? Tantai Chong Un, who had been holding on to Su Fengyan, turned his head with a hurt expression. Tantai Kong Ho slapped her forehead. Having such an unscrupulous second brother was really a disgrace. However, she did not feel that her second brother, who came from an aristocratic family, associated with a poor and pedantic person, even calling him brother was inappropriate. What's more, this outsider with a saber did not look ugly. In terms of martial arts, he was able to tie with Yang Dianchen at a young age. If he fell into second brother's hands, he would be dragged to drink and chat nonsense. If he was seen by eldest brother, who cherished talent like his own life, he would be invited back to the city overseer's mansion to be enshrined as a bodhisattva. Young Lady Anyang was like what Su Fengyan had seen from the window on the second floor. She was a plump and fair-skinned beauty. She was dressed in brocade, which set her off like a pampered noblewoman. Such a graceful woman could very well arouse the love and desire of influential men. Boys were born with ambition from poverty, and women were born with temperament from wealth. This was a very real truth. The most famous courtesans of the Liang dynasty were the imperial concubine Jieyu of the fallen Spring and Autumn dynasty. However, after 20 years she had already become a swan song. She could not be encountered nor sought. The second type was a woman from an official's family who had been convicted and demoted. The third type was Qing Ling, who entered the brothel from childhood and was carefully cultivated. slowly growing into a courtesan. According to Li Lu, the top courtesan of the Guanghan house who was holding a zither, was the daughter of a defeated big family in the Orange State. After sitting down as the head of the Guanghan house, Tantai Chang'an did not treat young lady Anyang condescendingly. He smiled and said, "Sister Anyang, can you play mountain and flowing water? I get along very well with this unknown young master beside me." Miss Anyang pursed her lips and smiled. Apparently, she was familiar with the temperament of this second young master of the Tantai family. She did not exchange any unnecessary greetings and only nodded. Of Guanghans. Tifingyan Iguaz. Kom Kong Ho. Guanghan Tantai Chang'an smiled and said, "You probably know my family name. But in order to show my sincerity, I'd like to say that I'm Tantai Chang'an. I'm just a small branch of the Tantai clan of the Dragon Pass. I'm just a small branch on a towering tree. I can't scare the real dignitaries. I think my parents gave me the name Chang. And I don't expect the Flying Fox City to be in peace for a long time. I just want to keep myself safe for a long time. Young Master Su, do I look like a guy with great ambition? I'm just pretending to deceive those ambitious girls who won't marry unless they're officials or generals. However, my foundation is not good enough. I'm much worse than my elder brother. Hey Sister Anyang, play your zither well. Don't bully me even though I don't know zither. I can tell that you're distracted. You're one of the girls I mentioned." Su Fingyin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was more sensitive to danger than the little girl Tao Manwu who had telepathy. Unless Tantai Chang'an was an expert above the Vajra realm, he was really an interesting guy who didn't have any evil intentions. However, judging from his appearance and footsteps, he was obviously an ordinary playboy who was hollowed out by wine and women. If he pretended to cover up, Su Fingyin would be in serious trouble no matter whether he entered this yard or not, whether in terms of scheming or cultivation. So Su Fingyin decided to take things as they came. Observing qi was a necessary skill to travel in Jianghu. As for whether it was wrong, it depended on the level of both sides. A martial arts expert was like a rich man who didn't lack money. How could he be a real rich man if he wore a thumb-thick gold necklace or a string of copper coins on his body? When he was as rich as a country, he mostly hid gold in his sleeves. Once the qi movement was restrained, unless one was 2 realms higher and looked at it from top to bottom, it would be difficult to detect it accurately. For example, the jadeite between Miss Anyang's plump breasts was originally an inconspicuous type of gemstone, but because of the jadeite's unique advantages in stone gambling, it became popular. To a large extent, jadeite collectors were not interested in the jadeite itself, but the gambling process of peeling off the stone's skin, which was very moving. It was the same for masters. When traveling in Jianghu, most of them restrained their qi as if they were gambling with other masters. That was why they were mysterious. Otherwise, as soon as you went out, there would be cheers from onlookers and yelling, "Look, it's a level 2 master." If a level 1 master went out, the passers-by would take their families and yell out to watch. It was too outrageous. This was the essence of Jianghu's attraction. It could make you fail miserably, but it could also make you famous by stepping on others. If one reached the celestial state that resonated with heaven and earth, it was another story. Not to mention the first 3 realms of level 1, even earth immortals of the 4th realm could be identified. However, like the saints of the 3 sects, they hid their strength and bided their time. It was difficult to judge them with common sense. This was also the reason why the old Taoist Zhou Xuansu of Longhu Mountain could successively deceive the 2 sword immortals, Li Chungang and Dong Tai. The rest of the martial artists who proved their Dao with strength couldn't escape the celestial eye. Wang Xianji, who was the strongest in the world, and Tuoba, who was close behind, were said to be able to kill the other 8 people on the list once they joined forces. They didn't need any celestial phenomenon at all. Any martial artist could feel the terrifying aura emitted by these 2 gods. No matter who they faced, they could crush them. Even if they were earth immortals, they would be killed by pure strength. Tantai Chong, and really spared no effort to play wholeheartedly. Listening to the zither, he glanced at his sister who was happily drinking the plum blossom porridge cooked by him. He took a sip of wine and squinted, saying, "You must be joking. My ambition is to be a teacher in a rural private school. I serve the disobedient boys with a feather duster, but I'm more lenient with the girls. I don't have a bad idea, but I just think about how they will look when they grow up. They will be slender and elegant, get married, help their husbands and raise their children. I don't know why I feel happy when I think about it, Su Fengyan said calmly, how many times have I told my friends about this ambition? Tantai Chang'an said innocently, it's up to you to believe it or not. I really only told you about it. Su Fengyan couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance. Tantai Chang'an, when you were picking plum blossoms, you fell and damaged your brain? Tantai Kongho, who was drinking porridge but listening to the conversation, spat out a mouthful of porridge. She gave a thumbs up and said with a smile, Su Qi, well said. Tantai Chang'an rolled his eyes and said, Great aunt who just scolded me for helping outsiders. Should I scold you back a few times? In a war of words, who has your second brother lost to? Tantai Kongho made a face. Looking at that youth with the saber, he was much more pleasing to the eye. At least her second brother had innumerable friends. But those who dared to say that her second brother's brain was damaged could be counted on one's fingers. Besides, she hadn't known this wanderer for long. This straightforward courage and insight was to the liking of her city lord mansion's third young master. It was no different from this bowl of plum blossom porridge. Wasn't this the so-called no discord no concord? She leisurely ate the plum blossom porridge, her mood very good. Tantai Chang'an asked, Su Qi, what is your ambition? I see that your martial arts aren't bad. Do you want to be like Hong Jingyan, a martial artist revered by tens of thousands of people? Or do you want to be like Luo Yang, a devil with no misgivings? Or perhaps even more ambitious, to be like our Beimang's god of war, the only one in 100 years who can be called an indomitable dynasty? Su Fengyan thought for a moment and said calmly, I don't have that much ambition. I'm just thinking that there will be a day when my old man really dies of old age so I can leave with some peace of mind. Murong Kongho seemed to recall her own words on the fourth floor. She didn't care whether this Su Qi could hear her or not. She softly whispered, I'm sorry, Su Qi. I only spoke casually in Guanghan building. Tantai Chang'an was silent for the first time. After a long time he raised his cup and softly said, Very good. Your ambition is a bit bigger than mine. I don't like those fellows who keep on talking about helping the people. There are too many of these people in Flying Fox City. Many of my friends are the same. They always look high and far away, but they don't care about their feet. They don't travel far when their parents are healthy. They don't understand. Seeing Su Fengyan's gaze cast over, Tantai Chang'an awkwardly smiled and said, As long as you understand what I mean, it's fine. I didn't say that you were wrong. I'm ignorant and incompetent. With great difficulty I remember some principles, so I blindly opened my mouth. Su Fengyan smiled. Chapter 448. Tantai Chong, and laughed heartily as if he had seen a ghost. Su Qi, you stingy brother are finally willing to give me a smile. Come on, let's drink a cup of wine. Let's have a toast. Su Fengyan raised his glass and drank it up. Because he recalled many past events, he certainly liked the childhood when his mother was still alive. He was carefree and played with two sisters who loved him dearly. Even if his mother urged him to study and learn to read more strictly, he was also carefree. He was not afraid even if the sky fell down. His mother had a sword and his father had 300,000 cavalries. He was a child who didn't need to bear anything. What was there to be afraid of? His Highness the Crown Prince did not hate Li Hanlin, who shared the same rotten taste as him, Yan Qiji, who was more like a girl, and Kong Wuqi, who spared no effort to take the lead in getting into trouble. When he thought of something that didn't go his way, he would vent his anger on Su Xiao, pick up a broom and chase him down. Not to mention in the mansion of the vassal of the dynasty, it was probably an unimaginable absurd scene in any aristocratic family. However, Su Xiao was not angry every time. At first Su Fengyan did not understand. He just felt that Su Xiao had let his mother down, so he had to be beaten up. If he dared to be angry, he would run to the mausoleum and complain to his mother. When he grew up, it was not that he really wanted to compete with Su Xiao in a dead end. He must have been holding back his resentment before he casually picked up a stool and a broom to chase him away. It was just that it had become natural. Many times his hands were itchy and convenient. The father and son really did not care about how the world looked at them. Su Fengyan said slowly, Tantai Chang'an, if you didn't lie, your ambition is actually quite good. Tantai Chang'an nodded hard and said, I know you will understand me. Don't say more. Let's have another drink. Su Fengyan rolled his eyes and said, Leave my ass. In order to see Miss Wei and save some money, I drank a whole pot of yellow wine at Sister Shi's place. If I leave again, I'll really have to lie here. Tantai Chang'an drank a cup of wine alone happily and said, You're awesome. Suchi, you and I have the same taste in women. But no matter how I please her, Sister Shi never lets me into her room, let alone drink in her room. Since I was 15 years old and saw Sister Shi, who was still a top courtesan at that time, I was shocked by her beauty. Such a sister is so considerate. If this mature peony with full charm was picked by someone else, I would be angry with him. If it were you, I would also bear it. He was a good brother. Half of the reason why I bought Guanghan Tower was because of Sister Shi. As for the other half, you know it too. On one hand, I'm earning money for my own expenses. On the other hand, I'm helping my family build some connections. In any case, I'm not doing anything wrong. This is the only thing I've done in my life that makes my father feel comfortable. Even though Su Fengnian had seen a lot of playboys' strange faces, he was also speechless. If this guy sat with Li Hanlin, he would really sign a card and swear brotherhood with him. Tantai Chang'an was like a woman who had never seen a man who liked to think too highly of himself. He didn't care whether Su Fengnian accompanied him or not and just drank one cup after another. But they were all good liquor. Soon his face turned red. His body was weak and there was a sign of tongue-tied. Su Fengnian stood up and said, "It's late. I'll leave first. I'll come back tomorrow." Su Fengnian apologized to Miss Anyang with a smile. Su Qi is really shy of money. He doesn't dare to enter Miss Anyang's yard for fear that he will be beaten out. Guanghan Tower's courtesan smiled reservedly and said, "No matter. Tomorrow you'll see Sister Xiu first. The day after tomorrow you can come back to this yard to listen to the zither. Since you're second young master's confidant, if you still dare to accept young master Su's money, Anyang's rice bowl won't be guaranteed." Tantai Chang'an staggered and sat back in his seat. He cupped his fist and said, "Su Qi, I won't see you out. I'm afraid you'll be suspicious and I'll investigate your background. At that time we won't be brothers anymore. It'll be a great injustice." Su Fengnian walked out of the yard and went to the 4th floor to pick up Tao Manwu from Shi. The small yard was so quiet that the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Tantai Chang'an was still drinking, but he raised his cup a lot slower. Miss Anyang propped up her cheek and stared at this extremely interesting young master. She looked at him for many years and seemed to have seen through him, but she always felt that she still didn't see through him. She only felt that looking at him quietly like this, she wouldn't be tired of it for the rest of her life. Tantai Kong Ho wanted to sneakily drink a cup of wine, but she was patted on the back of her hand. She retracted her hand and snorted, "Stingy." Tantai Chang'an's handsome face flushed red and he vaguely said, "Girls, why drink wine? If there's a time when second brother isn't here, you get drunk with someone and get bullied. At that time second brother will be angered to death by you." The city overseer's estate's third young master smiled sweetly. Then he put away his smile and asked in a low voice, "Second brother, you really won't investigate this Su Qi's background?" The drunken Tantai Chang'an shook his head and said, "Won't investigate." Tantai Kong Ho frowned and said, "Why? This guy is only 20 years old. He's only a few years older than me, yet he can fight Yang Dianchen to a draw. Isn't it strange?" Tantai Chang'an smiled from the bottom of his heart and said, "You see, second brother, I'm called Tantai Chang'an. I've been safe and sound for so many years. Su Qi, strange and strange. What's wrong with that?" Tantai Kong Ho kicked second brother and angrily said, "Preposterous." Seeing second brother ignore her, she curiously asked, "Second brother, do you really want to be a teacher? I didn't hear you say it before. You're just fooling that Su Qi, right?" Tantai Chang'an leaned on the table with one hand holding a cup. He looked at the moon and sparse stars above his head and muttered, "Half a sentence is too much when we're not on the same wavelength. 1,000 cups are too little when drinking with a bosom friend. Drunk. He unexpectedly fell asleep just like this. When Su Fengnian saw Shi Jiejie again, she really didn't have a good expression. She was definitely brooding over that slap. Su Fengnian was also happy to play dumb. He carried Tao Manwu and walked downstairs. He slowly left the bottle alley in the dead of night. When he walked out of the building, he waved his hand toward a window on the 4th floor. She dodged in panic. She was full of shame and hatefully cursed, "Rogue." She subconsciously rubbed her buttocks and bit her lips. Her charming eyes were hazy. At this moment her seductive manner was practically unparalleled in the city. Su Fengnian walked out of the bottle alley. The little girl hugged her beloved porcelain pillow. The corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up. Hugging the pillow was much more comfortable than carrying the heavy luggage. Su Fengyan narrowed his eyes. His heart was not as relaxed as he appeared to be. Other than the face that Xu Xiu had painstakingly made for him and the puppet of the fake crown prince in the Wutong garden, this trip to the north meant that the entire Bailiang Palace's brain was meticulously operating. They had done too many things in secret. For example, the travel permit that Su Fengyan had on him now meant that he came from a very real family in Gusezu. He was the son of a concubine from a family that was in the porcelain business. His Royal Highness had also taken root because of this. The pitiful owner was certain that he had died somewhere unknown. He might not have the opportunity to be buried in his ancestral grave and erect a tombstone in his lifetime. One step after another. Not a single step could go wrong. Su Xiao made it clear that as long as his Royal Highness left Bailiang, he would not send any more men of sacrifice to protect him. Li Yishan and the other people involved had no objections. This was because they all knew that if more men of sacrifice followed him, there would be clues to be found. Beimeng had a tight spider web that enveloped the entire imperial court. These bloodthirsty spiders were the most sensitive to the slightest movement on the spider web. Spider web was a homonym of Zhu Hua. It was created by Li Mibi, a close official of the Beimeng emperor. He imitated Zhao Go of the Liang dynasty, but surpassed his master. He used a pole to catch butterflies and dragonflies. It sounded poetic but was extremely bloody. Once someone was stuck on the pole, their head would fall to the ground. Because this shady organization could act first and report later, it showed the trust that the Empress of Beimeng had in Li Mibi. Therefore, Li Mibi had always been regarded as the ninth shadow edict holder. It was hard to imagine that this powerful executioner had killed several members of the Yelu royal family. Most of the descendants of the Murong family had also died at his hands. 20 years ago he was just a depressed scholar from the eastern Yuehan tribe. Perhaps it was true that some people were destined to live in seclusion and turn into dragons when faced with wind and rain. Li Yishan once said that the death of Li Mibi was equivalent to cutting off one eye and one arm of the Empress of Beimeng. But this old scholar, who was already 60 years old, could be regarded as the ancestor of assassination. Unless he died of old age or was killed by the Empress of Beimeng, there was no possibility for him to be assassinated. Su Fengyan couldn't tell whether Tantai Chang'an was really a playboy or a fake playboy. But after weighing and calculating all the details of entering the Flying Fox City, he was sure that there was no possibility of giving himself away. So he didn't bother about it. After all, he could just kill his way out of the city. Tao Manwu suddenly whispered, "After you left, I didn't say a word. But Aunt Shi said that you were a rogue." Su Fengyan nodded and smiled. "What do you know? A woman said that you were a rogue. It's a compliment." Tao Manwu said, "Oh. Maybe it was revenge that he was not allowed to talk to Aunt Shi, so he kept repeating, 'Rogue, rogue, rogue.'" Su Fengyan sneered, "Little girl, it's 10 years too early for me to slap your ass." Tao Manwu changed to a more comfortable position and snuggled in his arms. This time she only said once, "Rogue." Chapter 449. Taking advantage of the fact that there were many brothels in the city, the night ban in Flying Fox City was relaxed. Even at this time, there were still many men carrying trays and stretchers on the streets, shouting and selling. Tao Manwu was a little foodie, so he couldn't sleep well if he didn't fill his stomach. In the end, it was Su Fengyan who had to suffer. Therefore, he took out a small piece of silver and bought 2 bowls of golden rice cooked with purple necklaces, flower petals, and a few pastries. When they arrived at the inn, it was Li Lu who was keeping watch. Usually he would be dozing off at this time of the night, but he was probably too excited after his trip to Bottle Alley. Su Fengyan asked for a table and asked him to eat with him. The strong and honest young man said okay and didn't act too polite with this young Master Su. When he saw the little girl whose nickname was Peach holding an exquisite porcelain pillow, he didn't know where it came from, so he didn't ask too much. Su Fengyan pointed upstairs and Tao Manwu stopped eating. He quickly wiped his mouth and got up. Su Fengyan gave the remaining pastries to Li Lu. In the room with her back to Tao Manwu, she pulled out the flying sword which was used to assassinate the guards at the gate. She pierced her fingernails into her palm and wiped it on the floating flying sword. It seemed to be an understatement, but it was full of mysteries. The 12 flying sword embryos were different at the time when they came out of the furnace, and their textures were also very different. Drinking blood to become a fetus was a slow and delicate work. If there was more blood, the sword pattern would overflow, and if there was less blood, the sword aura would weaken. The textures were like the mouth of a psychic flying sword, which could not be neglected. Su Fengnian did not hurry to put by and back into his sleeve. He looked at the scenery in front of him, which was like ripples in the clear water when the wind blew, and sighed softly. The joy in Guanghan building was not what he felt the most, but the small decorations in the room that were like the calligraphy and ink used by the famous scholars of the Liang dynasty. Su Fengnian's mood, which had been gloomy since he entered the Dragon's Waste province, finally became a little better. Even the top courtesan of the brothel was so fond of the elegant wares of the Central Plains. Presumably, most of the scholars who fled to Beimang would not change their rich and prosperous status even if they lived in a foreign land. These elegant habits that would revive in times of peace and prosperity would eventually have a subtle influence on the influential class of Beimang. Just like His Royal Highness raised his sword, it slowly penetrated into this barbaric dynasty that worshipped martial arts. The Empress of Beimang accepted the remnants of the spring and autumn period with great generosity and promoted scholars without restraint. The advantages were obvious, but the disadvantages were hidden. Tantai Chang'an, who was as outstanding as any aristocratic family in the south, was an excellent example. How many warhorses and armors could a cage of dragon's tongue sparrows buy? Su Fengnian quietly put away by and let out a long sigh. He turned his head to look at Tao Manwu, who was lying on the bed and staring at the porcelain pillow. He smiled and teased, "Little money grubber, will you bring a porcelain pillow with you when you leave the city in the future? Won't you be tired?" Tao Manwu said with a firm expression, "I can carry a money bag and hold a porcelain pillow." Su Fengnian nodded. "Very good. If I don't have any money to spend, I can sell the porcelain pillow in exchange for wine." Tao Manwu was extremely nervous. She carefully looked at Su Fengnian and grinned as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Ever since she could remember, the little girl had always felt uneasy about her talent. But at this moment she was complacent for the first time. Su Fengnian asked curiously, "You can see through people's hearts. Do you even know what they're thinking, or do you only know how to differentiate between good and bad thoughts?" Tao Manwu hesitated for a moment and kept her mouth shut. Su Fengnian said with a smile, "I heard that in Flying Fox City, there's the Chow family's peony buns, Granny Shue's meat pies, Jiaqing's bottle alley soup, May's roast goose and duck, and Duan's mutton rice. There's a lot to see. Do you want to eat while watching?" Tao Manwu snorted. Su Fengnian said with a regretful expression, "Okay, then I'll go shopping tomorrow. You can stay in the inn and hold a porcelain pillow and count the money." The little girl, who could not be swayed by force and could not be swayed by poverty, snorted twice. Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. He extinguished the oil lamp on the table and sat cross-legged on the bed against the wall. He said with a smile, "Go to sleep." The little girl rolled over and took the opportunity to kick him lightly. Su Fengnian ignored her and concentrated. In 2 hours he still had to raise the flying sword Huang Tong. Fortunately, the great yellow courtyard could make him half asleep. Raising the sword for 12 hours required him to work hard every 2 hours, so he would not be too tired. In fact, even if he did not have to raise the sword, Su Fengnian did not dare to sleep too deeply. After a while, the little girl, who was used to falling asleep in Su Fengnian's arms, let go of the cold porcelain pillow and slipped into his warm embrace. Soon she was snoring lightly and fell asleep. Su Fengnian raised the 3 swords one by one. When the sky turned bright, he wrapped Tao Manwu in the quilt and went to sleep. He picked up the spring thunder saber on the bedside and walked to the window to stretch himself. He had a premonition that a storm was coming. It was neither good nor bad, so he did not have to worry about it. After killing Xia Ling to his heart's content, not to mention the benefits brought by the Enlightenment, his mentality and temperament had completely changed. Outside the window it was drizzling. The pitter-patter of the spring rain was soft and the gentle breeze moistened everything. Tao Manwu slowly woke up and stared at the figure in a daze. This world was naturally different from ordinary people in her eyes. In the little girl's eyes, everyone was shrouded in a layer of brilliance. Most of the people in the marketplace were gray and white. Occasionally, there would be people with varying degrees of green and purple halos. Her father was like a green mountain. Uncle Dong was surrounded by purple air. The dying people were as black as ink. When bad people were full of murderous intent, they would be scarlet and dazzling. A kind-hearted woman like Aunt Shi was warm and yellow inside and outside. Everything in the world was exceptionally splendid in Tao Manwu's eyes. The older she grew, the clearer it became. The young man in front of her was dark purple and mixed with gold. It was the first time she had seen such a scene in her life. Chapter 450. Tao Manwu didn't know that if someone noticed her, she would be regarded as the reincarnation of the living Buddha of Buddhism and the celestial being of Taoism. Unfortunately, Xieling didn't know why he didn't know. If he paid attention to her heart of colorful glass instead of his royal highness, she might be able to return to the peak of the finger mystery state. As for whether she would be counterattacked by fate after that, she believed that Xieling the devil would not care about it because he was obsessed with killing Luo Yang. Su Fengnian didn't interrupt the little girl's examination behind him. He waited for her to withdraw her gaze before he turned around and said with a smile, "After breakfast I'll take you to the temple fair." Tao Manwu looked puzzled. She didn't understand why he was so merciful. In her opinion, this bad guy who didn't show his true face was shrewd and unscrupulous. He made her suffer a lot. Why did he change his mind after one night? Su Fengnian chuckled and said, "I've already thought about it. When the time comes, I'll leave Flying Fox City alone. I won't take you a burden out of the city. Don't worry, it won't affect your food and clothes. It'll definitely be more comfortable than following me. Since we're still together, I'll pretend to be a good person for a few days so that you won't hate me. I heard that people like you can see through people's hearts. Whenever you can't forget someone, God will definitely echo. I still want to live well. It's not good to be on tenterhooks all day long." The little girl bit her lips and stared at him. She was sure that he wasn't lying and really intended to leave her in Flying Fox City. The little girl, who should have been glad to escape from danger, didn't know how to hide her feelings. She looked gloomy. Su Fengnian didn't add fuel to the fire. He led her downstairs. After eating the stomach-warming breakfast, they walked to Suguan Alley in the west of the city. Along the way, the little girl's face was cold. She didn't look good to Su Fengnian, who had a new cold and ruthless impression. However, the joys and sorrows of a child's experience were like a jug of new wine, with the taste floating above it. It was not like the taste of an adult's old wine, which had settled at the bottom of the wine jug. If one did not drink it all, the spoon would not be clean. Su Fengnian used a stick of sugar-coated haws and a small lacquer box with a spider-spinning web to make Tao Manwu happy. The box was named Qiqiao. It was also an exquisite toy from the Central Plains to Beimang. He stored the small spider in the box and observed how dense the web was in the next few days. It was a small item that most women in the spring and autumn period would buy during the Qixi festival. He put a small piece of paper in the box and wrote the name of the man he liked on it. The spider silk was a red rope from the moon god, which was a good sign. If the web was dense and luxuriant, the woman would naturally be happy to see it. Su Fengnian's strides were big. After 2 trips, he was used to all kinds of performances and sales at temple fairs. He disliked the little girl who was walking slowly with her eyes wide open, so he simply let her ride on his neck. Tao Manwu was sulking with this guy, so he didn't care about his ladylike manners and rode on his neck. He put his little head on his big head and didn't even give him a stick of sugar-coated haws to eat. He wanted him to die of hunger. For a while, they watched the simple shadow puppet show, which was about the border war between Liang Mang and Liang Mang. It was reasonable for the generals of Beimang, including Huang Songpu, to be sculpted to have a dignified appearance. However, the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, and the little man Chen Jibao were sculpted to be ferocious and ugly, which was very pleasing to the people of Flying Fox City. Su Fengnian laughed it off and didn't wrongly accuse Su Shao. However, Chen Jibao, who was a handsome soldier in white in his prime, was sculpted to be such an unsightly and ugly character, which was unfair to the people of Flying Fox City. The puppeteer played the role of the storyteller. Since the paper characters were the most powerful military officials on the border between the 2 dynasties, they were inseparable from the raging flames of war. This was slightly different from the storytellers in wine shops and tea houses who talked about the events before the war. When it came to deliberately exaggerating the intense war, the audience was unable to take their eyes off it. They held their breath in rapt attention, completely immersed in the play. Su Fengnian had just walked away when he saw Tantai Chong and his younger sister, Tantai Kong Ho, walking with several retainers in the midst of the bustling stream of people. Tantai Kong Ho's hand was also carrying an ingenious spider box. However, it was a red sandalwood box. The amount of silver it consumed was far from being comparable to the wooden box in Tao Manwu's hand. The spiders in the box were even more different. Presumably, the spiders of the city overseer's third son would, as a matter of course, be even more ingenious. After the two sides looked at each other, Tan Tai Chong An's smile was brilliant. He took the lead and walked over. Turning his head to his younger sister, he proudly said, "How is it? I guessed right. Su Qi will definitely come to the temple fair." Tan Tai Kong Ho glared at Su Qi and helplessly said, "Isn't it just losing a tail of silver to you in a bet? What are you so proud of?" Tan Tai Chong An laughed heartily and said, "Second brother won someone else's 100 taels of gold and won't necessarily be happy. Maybe it's them who are secretly happy. However, earning a copper coin from you is worth being happy." Su Fingyan was even more helpless than Tan Tai Kong Ho. This Flying Fox City's #1 debauchee's second young master was truly a divine strategist. He did not know why, but Su Fingyan truly believed that Tan Tai Chong An was here to wait for the hare and not to have someone spy on him. On one hand, with Su Fingyan's current mysterious five senses, he could easily detect special gazes in the surroundings. Moreover, he did not have any ill feelings towards this unscrupulous child who had the ambition to be a countryside teacher. This could not be called a hero sympathizing with each other, it could be considered a debauchee sympathizing with each other. Especially after Tao Manwu did not have any abnormalities, Su Fingyan was even more relieved. Tan Tai Chong An had a straightforward temperament. Seeing Tao Manwu's cute appearance, he reached out to pinch his cheeks. After being dodged, he did not mind and made fun of his younger sister. "This younger sister of mine keeps on saying that she wants to marry me as a wife, but in fact she secretly admires a handsome young master from Hulyen's family. Didn't she just buy a strange item? Later she will certainly secretly write down that handsome young master's name like a thief. If I don't see brother Su Qi today, I won't expose her thoughts. She will climb the wall in the middle of the night to steal that slip of paper and throw it away. I'll let her cry to death in front of a cobweb the next day." The red-faced Tan Tai Kong Ho fiercely stomped on Tan Tai Chong An's foot. The latter felt a burst of pain and sucked in a cold breath. He could only dare to be angry but did not dare to speak to this spoiled younger sister. After strolling around together for an hour, Tan Tai Chong An was pulled away by the impatient Tan Tai Kong Ho. The second young master and Su Fingyan had an appointment to drink at Guanghan House in the evening and was forcibly dragged away by his younger sister. Looking at this pair of brother and sister who had a harmonious relationship, Su Fingyan stood in place and did not move his feet for a long time. Tao Manwu reached out her small hand and rubbed his brows. Chapter 451. Tao Manwu was riding on the neck of a certain bad guy with a clear conscience, looking into the distance and leisurely touring the temple fair. Suddenly he noticed that the guy with the fake mask had stopped. Following his line of sight, he saw a skinny young lady standing in front of him, timidly handing out a thin brochure. Su Fingyan was stunned for a moment and took the brochure from the skinny young lady. This kind of brochure was a small trick used by storytellers to attract business. It roughly wrote a few sentences about the content of the story, whether it was about the Iron Horseman, the fireworks Fendai, or the ghost period. The fragrance of wine was afraid of the deep alley. Other than the main character staying in the wine shop or tea house, the person setting up the stage on the street would invite customers to come in and listen to the story. The level of extravagance was linked to the level of fame. Some famous storytellers could often hang a golden banner outside a downtown restaurant. This one was quite shabby with only a piece of paper at the end of a red post. But what surprised Su Fingyan was that he recognized this young lady. She was the grandfather and granddaughter he saw in a secluded tea house in the city before leaving Bailiang. The old and blind storyteller was talking while drinking wine, and the young lady was holding a low-quality pipa. Su Fingyan was even more shocked when he saw what was written in the brochure. She dared to tell the story of the heir of Bailiang traveling thousands of miles in the city of Baimang? He looked around and quietly watched the young lady hand out more than a dozen brochures before following her into a relatively quiet tea house with Tao Manwu on his back. After sitting down, he ordered a pot of tea. Sure enough, he saw that there was an empty space in the center of the tea house. The blind old man habitually placed a bamboo board and a bowl of turbid wine on a small wooden stool. After his granddaughter handed over the simple brochure, she trotted to the old man, carefully picked up the pipa, and whispered a few words to her grandfather. Probably because the old man's story of His Royal Highness of Bailiang was too fresh and shocking, most of the brochures he handed out attracted real customers who were willing to pay for the tea. The owner of the tea house beamed with joy and was very satisfied with his vision and courage. The blind storyteller picked up the bowl and took a sip of wine to moisten his throat. He didn't get to the main topic but said in a clear voice, "Today I won't talk about the smoke powder of a man and a woman entangling together, nor will I talk about the spiritual monsters outside the human world. I'll just talk about the heir of Bailiang traveling thousands of miles with 2 swords at his waist. It's enough to make the officials laugh a little." When the old storyteller finished speaking, the young lady took advantage of the opportunity to play the pipa. The old man picked up the bowl and drank another mouthful of the strong wine rewarded by the owner of the tea house. He gently put it down, picked up the bamboo board and recited according to the rules. Intelligence and cleverness are innate, ignorance and hedonism may not be true. Absurdity is only because the times have risen. War and war horses laugh deeply. The long river of 9 bends is shallower than the heart. 10 heavy armored horses are like thunder. How can wine and women forget the country? Only then do you know that poetry and books mislead the world. The sound of the pipa gradually rose, but it was still like a small bridge and flowing water, not sonorous. Su Fingyan, who was sitting in the corner, smiled knowingly. He didn't look at the grandfather-granddaughter pair, but just looked out the window at the stream of traffic. He somewhat admired this old storyteller who actually dared to speak well of His Royal Highness in Beimang. Fortunately, Beimang's culture was rough and open-minded. There was no literary prison and very few people were convicted for speaking. Even if one criticized the government, it wasn't a big deal. Of course, what the old man said was based on hearsay and it was very different from the truth. However, it was quite a gimmick and the audience found it very interesting. Especially when he talked about how His Highness the heir apparent had single-handedly faced off against Prince Jinggan Zhaoheng and 1,000 armored cavalry outside Xiangfan city. Some of the customers who didn't take it seriously at first became engrossed in the story. A few of the audience members who originally wanted to leave also returned to their seats and asked for another pot of tea from the waiter. The blind old man also pretended to stop at this moment. The customers knew that he was going to collect money. There were a few tables that threw some copper coins into a large white porcelain bowl. Ding ding dong dong, it was very pleasing to the ear. The elder no longer kept them in suspense and continued to speak tirelessly. When he reached the part where the Prince of Northern Liang used a spear to stab a valiant cavalry general to death, the guests immediately gasped in surprise and clicked their tongues. They first looked at each other in dismay, and then began to discuss spiritedly. Most likely they didn't believe that this prince had such ability in a horse battle. As for the Prince of Jinggan Zhaoheng, the northern Mang people had heard about it because the storyteller had told them too much about the Liang dynasty's prince's struggle for the throne. They knew that this vassal king was only unlucky, unable to become the supreme ruler of the 9 and 5. Su Fingyan saw that Tao Manwu was speechless and his eyes were wide open. He looked like he wanted to rush over and urge the old man to quickly talk. Su Fingyan pricked his finger under the table and dripped a drop of blood to nourish the sword. After keeping the sword in his sleeve, he poured himself a cup of tea and closed his eyes to concentrate. The blind old man was very clever. When the audience was a little impatient, he finally talked about the ancestral court of Taoism, Mount Longhu. He talked about the great general Su Zhao's deeds in Jianghu. The audience was immediately intrigued again. Su Fingyan couldn't help but laugh. There weren't many people who survived the battle on the snowy plains, and those who survived would never reveal the secrets of heaven. The old man was very mysterious. When he talked about the Mount Huiyu's purple thunder formation, he only said that it was the supreme divine ability of the sword god Li Chungang. Most of the audience scoffed. Looking at the situation, wasn't this old man wearing a sheepskin coat even more powerful than our Beimang's god of war, Tuoba? Then why wasn't this old god of sword among the top 10 martial arts judges? They only heard that there was a Dong Tai holding a peach branch. The old man heard the boos and countless boos, but he wasn't anxious. At this time the sound of the pipa became louder and louder. It was like a silver bottle breaking and splashing water, making people worry if the little girl's weak and delicate hands could hold on. In the magnificent atmosphere created by the pipa, the old man talked about the finale of the show, the arrival of the flying sword. He said that the old god of sword used the word sword to make thousands of swords from Mount Hui and Mount Longhu fly to the snowy plains and cover the sky. The audience was dumbfounded. Oh my, could it be that he was really one of the few immortals on earth? When the old man talked about how Mount Longhu's master Zhao asked the old god of sword to return to his residence, the old man paused and said word by word, "Do you know what happened next?" This time the tea guests were very happy to give the copper coins. Soon the big bowl was filled to the brim. Some impatient people ran to throw away the copper coins and sat back in their seats. They hurriedly said, "Old man, tell us." The blind storyteller drank a mouthful of wine and said with a smile, "Senior Li, who is in the Sword Celestial Realm, sent a message to the big Mount Longhu. His Royal Highness said that there was no need to return it." The whole tea house was dead silent. Then there was a roar of applause. Many tea guests who felt that their anger had been vented began to hit the table. Tao Manwu, who was beside Su Fengnian, chuckled. Su Fengnian took out a small piece of silver and shook his head. The little girl originally thought that the old man's storytelling was brilliant and varied. Seeing that this stingy man was unexpectedly generous, she finally smiled. She grabbed the silver and ran to the center of the tea house. She gently placed it into the bowl with her face flushed red. Then she ran back to Su Fengnian's side and snuggled up to him, not daring to look at others. Everyone only thought that this young man was most likely a rich son who had too much money and nowhere to spend it. They didn't think much of it. When the blind storyteller talked about the Eastern Sea's martial emperor city, he only said that His Highness the Crown Prince carried a bowl to the top of the city wall, but he didn't tell the whole story. The guests in the tea house were shocked to the core. They all thought that this hereditary crown prince of the northern Liang was really daring. They didn't investigate the details and heard that the storyteller was telling a story. When the old man said that the world's number one Wang Xianji flew to the surface of the East Sea, opened the gate of heaven with sword God's sword, and made the East Sea rise, the tea house suddenly became silent. Beimang's people were valiant. No matter how feminine the Flying Fox city was, it was still in comparison to other cities. After all, the blood of warriors still flowed in their bones. They could look down on the emperors, dukes and marquises of the Liang dynasty and look down on those soft and romantic scholars. However, they definitely wouldn't look down on the famous General Gu Jiantang from the spring and autumn period. They also didn't dare to look down on the city master of Martial Emperor City who had dominated Jianghu for 60 years. Everyone in Beimang only regretted that this old warrior wasn't from their dynasty. However, they wouldn't doubt that Wang Xianji could be ranked above Tuoba and become the world's number one. It was to the extent that they felt great reverence towards the mortal enemy of northern Mang, the butcher Su Shao. There was no lack of people in northern Mang who sincerely admired Su Shao, regardless of whether it was in the marketplace or in the imperial court. When the rumor spread that the emperor was willing to marry Su Shao, they angrily scolded the arrogant lame Su for not knowing what was good for him. In the end, few people said that Su Shao didn't deserve to share the world with the empress. In Beimang's view, who else in the world was more worthy of their empress than the butcher? The emperor of the Liang dynasty? Get out of here and *ck off. In the end, the tide rose on the banks of the Guangling River. His Royal Highness cut off his flesh. Li Chungang cut off 2,600 armor with his sword. The tea house was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Only the sound of the pipa could be heard. Even the manager of the tea house was dumbfounded. He slowly took out a few pieces of silver that hadn't even warmed up yet and had the waiter put them in his bowl. He didn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. Luckily, he had invited this grandfather-grandson pair to tell stories today and earned a lot of extra money. He had made up his mind to let them continue to tell stories for a few more days. He was sure that business would be booming and money would flow in. After the story was finished, some of the wealthier customers added a bit more money to spare. Su Fengnian patted Tao Manwu's little head and said with a smile, "Go, tell that sister who plays the pipa that I'm inviting them to tea." Chapter 452. Tao Manwu ran over cheerfully. The grandfather and grandson pair usually did not go through these formalities, but perhaps because they saw that the young lady was innocent and looked kind, and that the young master sitting by the window did not seem like a bad person, they agreed. Su Fengnian beckoned for the waiter and ordered a pot of good tea and wine. Tao Manwu sat beside Su Fengnian and looked at her sister with admiration. She had only learned the zither and knew nothing about the pipa. She only felt that this young lady was very impressive. The blind old man drank a mouthful of wine and took a sip, slowly savoring the aftertaste. A knowing smile appeared on his weathered face. "Thank you, young master, for the money and wine. It's a pity that this old man only knows how to tell stories and has no way of repaying you." Zhu Xian smiled. I just thought that the stories were good to listen to and had some money on me. It wasn't easy for me to pass the time, so it's a pleasant surprise. Old sir, you don't have to take it to heart. Just treat it as meeting an old friend in a foreign land. It's normal for the one who has more money in his pocket to treat you to some wine. The old man laughed heartily. That's true. Young master is magnanimous, so this old man can't be unreasonable. Come, let's have a toast. Although this wine is not as authentic as the green ant from Bailiang, it's still good wine. The two drank the wine in one gulp. As for the young ladies, they drank tea. The shopkeeper also gave them some cakes and fruits that did not cost much. They were also in a relaxed mood. Zhu Xian smiled and asked, Old sir, aren't you afraid of getting into trouble by saying good things about the heir of Bailiang in Beimeng? The old storyteller shook his head. What's there to be afraid of? In today's world, if you want to earn more money than your peers, you can't be afraid of trouble. Zhu Xian saw the scars on the back of the old man's hand as he held the bowl. He asked, Old sir, were you once a soldier of Bailiang? The knife wound on the back of my hand was not light. The old man probably had a fiery temper when he was young. Now that he spoke without any scruples, he laughed straightforwardly. Isn't that so? At that time I was in so much pain that I almost cried for my parents. At that time I had just joined the Northern Liang army and was laughed at by the old sergeant. Later on I suffered more serious injuries, but I gritted my teeth and endured it. Now that I'm old, I really admire myself. However, young master might not know about the Northern Liang army at that time. If you didn't have any scars, how could you have the nerve to greet your fellow soldiers who killed people shoulder to shoulder? You would have been treated as a little girl. It's funny to say that after joining the army for a few years, I couldn't wait to be hacked a few more times. Before our old sergeant died, he said, Whoever wants to usurp my position, take off your clothes. Whoever has more scars than me will be the sergeant. In short, whoever has more heads than me will be the sergeant. In short, whoever has more heads than me will have to be the sergeant. Zhu Xian muttered, Old sir, why did you say that you were in the Bailiang army back then? The storyteller drank a mouthful of wine and hesitated for a moment. After taking another big gulp, he slowly smiled bitterly and said, These words can only be said to an outsider like you, young master. It's not a secret and it's not a family scandal. Back then, our general defeated the Western Wall and destroyed the West Chu dynasty, which was almost as powerful as Liang at that time. Everyone in the Bailiang army was filled with resentment. They thought about how easy it was for those civil officials in the capital to talk. Even the old emperor was suspicious of the general. Why don't we just rebel? Let the great general be the emperor himself. The great general would sit on the dragon throne and wear the dragon robe. Who wouldn't be convinced? It's a pity that the general refused. In fact, it's not a big deal. For us old soldiers in Liaodong, as long as we serve the general, it's fine if we don't want to be the emperor. Later on, I followed him to Bailiang and the atmosphere changed. The general was still the general. No one complained, but the general was not a man with 4 heads and 6 arms. Some of the generals under him probably thought that the world was peaceful and that it was time for them to earn back their money. Later on, many civil officials who had never fought in wars also climbed up the ranks. This old man and some of my old brothers were disheartened, especially me. I was blind and didn't want to occupy the latrine pit and waste the rations of the Bailiang army. Seeing that the young master opposite him did not speak, the storyteller laughed and said, Young master, don't think that the 300,000 cavalrymen of Bailiang are easy to deal with just because this old man nagged. Some of the officials are unreasonable, but the general is still the general. To tell you the truth, it may sound unpleasant to your ears. As long as the general is the king of Bailiang, you Beimeng won't be able to take a single step south. If the general doesn't defeat the Beimeng royal court, you should pray to Buddha. Zhu Xian smiled and said, Drink. The blind storyteller raised his bowl and said, Drink. The old man drank to his heart's content and muttered to himself, The reason why I'm not dead yet is because I have to take care of this poor granddaughter of mine. Also, I'm afraid that the people of Bailiang will lose their morale. What if something happens to the general? What will happen to the 300,000 cavalrymen? 4 or 5 years ago, when this old man heard that His Royal Highness was idle and spent a lot of money in everything he did, he really wanted to go to the Bailiang palace and beat him up. Only later did I find out that this was not the case. Thinking that since I don't have many years left to live, I'll visit as many towns as I can in Beimang and have a good talk with the Beimang people about our future king of Beiliang. That way you northern barbarians won't be able to sleep well, huh? At most this old man will be scolded and beaten a few times. I won't die. If I really die in Beimang, it won't be worse than those old brothers who died on the battlefield. The old man came back to his senses and said with a guilty smile, "Young master from Flying Fox City, this old man is babbling nonsense. Please don't take it to heart. I drank too much this time." Su Fengyan shook his head and said with a Beiliang accent, "Old sir, how do you know that I'm not from Beiliang?" The storyteller was stunned and thought quickly. He guessed that this was a descendant of a Beiliang merchant who came to Beimang to do business. However, to be careful, he lowered his voice and said with a smile from the bottom of his heart, "No wonder you said that you met an old friend in a foreign land. Don't worry, this old man knows what's important. Today, I'll just treat it as drinking a pot of good wine with a young master from Flying Fox City." Su Fengyan said with a smile, "In the future, if this storyteller annoys the petty-minded Beimang people, you can scold the king of Beiliang and the crown prince of Beiliang. It doesn't matter. The world is big, but staying alive is the most important thing. Your granddaughter hasn't found a good man and is still relying on you to earn money." The storyteller shook his head and said, "What's there to scold? The great general has never done anything wrong in his life. If I scold the great general, I'll be rolled to death by the old Dekarches in the underworld. His Royal Highness can't bear to scold him. He was blind in the past and scolded him so much. If he scolded him one more time, I won't be able to die in peace. Since my granddaughter was born into the Song family, this is her life. There's nothing to complain about." The young lady holding the pipa smiled gently. She accepted her fate and was calm. Su Fengyan put down his wine cup and said softly, "Old sir, if you trust me, can you lend me your granddaughter's pipa to try playing? My second sister is especially good at martial pipa. I'm not as talented as her, but I've been influenced by her and know a thing or two. Maybe I can give you some simple insights." The old man said with a smile, "What's there to be reluctant about? You pass it to the young master." Su Fengyan smiled, "Miss, please pass me the zither wiping cloth as well." The young lady blushed and stood up. She carefully handed over her beloved pipa. After Su Fengyan carefully wiped the pipa, he sat upright and thought for a while. Then the 4 fingers of his right hand were lined up. From the zither string to the winding string, he quickly flicked it to the right. Then he withdrew 3 fingers and only used his right index finger to wind the string. The 3 strings of the old zither were played one after another. 1 stroke and 1 hook. The eyes of the young lady who had played the pipa for many years lit up. This pipa was only the lowest grade of whitewood pipa. Compared to those high-grade pipas made of red sandalwood, rosewood and rosewood, it was far from being strong enough to reach 2 or 3 li away. Su Fengyan gently demonstrated the strokes one by one. Then he raised his head and smiled at the young lady standing next to him. For a whitewood pipa, the sound quality is considered good. If money allows, you can add a little glue. Old sir said that the content of the book is especially critical of the pipa's brittleness. Also, the first string is not far from breaking. But in my opinion, since you're playing the pipa for the audience to enjoy, breaking the strings is also a beautiful thing that everyone will be happy to see. There's no need to rush to change the first string. I'll tell you more about the Chow family's pipa techniques. You can remember as much as you can." One spoke, the other listened. The blind old man sipped his wine slowly and leisurely. After Su Fengyan finished teaching the Chow family's techniques, which were recognized as almost extinct, he stood up and bid farewell. Holding Tao Man's small hand, he left the tea house. The young lady took back the pipa and muttered, "Grandfather, who is this young master?" The old man drank the last mouthful of wine. His face was rosy and he smiled. "He's probably a good person I met by chance." The old storyteller might not know in his life that he had once spoken face-to-face with the king of Beiliang about Beiliang. Chapter 453. Tao Man's small head rested on top of Su Fengyan's large head as they returned to the inn together. It was better to be happy together than to be happy alone. The little lass was prepared to show the young lady the ingenious spider box in her hands, but she didn't expect that when she arrived at the entrance she would see a ruckus outside. There were many green-skinned scoundrels cursing outside, their mouths full of vulgar words. Shopkeeper's son was standing on the stairs, bowing and smiling apologetically to a burly man. The burly man secretly handed over a pouch of silver to the shopkeeper. His originally cold smile suddenly changed as he threw the pouch of silver onto the ground and punched the old man in the chest. Shopkeeper's son's wife and 2 daughters were hiding in the inn's entrance, crying endlessly. When they saw the pillar of their family being knocked to the ground, they were stunned and didn't dare to support him, fearing that they would provoke these vicious villains. Su Fengnian asked the bystanders around him, and only then did he know the general situation. Shopkeeper's son's wife and eldest daughter were sightseeing in the city's western district when they encountered a scoundrel who wanted to take advantage of women. His eldest daughter's skin was thin and her temper was fierce, so when her bottom was touched she immediately slapped him. The green-skinned scoundrel was thin and weak, so he didn't expect the young lady to be so fierce. After being slapped to the ground he lost face. Seeing that she was an unfamiliar face, he didn't dare to act on the spot. He called a few of his idle neighbors and followed her to the Eastern District restaurant. After arguing with the local hoodlums, they found out that shopkeeper's son didn't have any backing. Thus they called a big brother from the underworld and called over 20 of their friends to kill him. They were determined to cut off a large amount of fat from shopkeeper's son's body. How could 7 or 8 taels of silver enter their eyes? After shopkeeper's son earned some money, he didn't have to worry about food or clothing. He had read a few books, so he had a scholarly air. He wanted to save face, so when he was hit by a single punch the pain was secondary. In the eyes of his neighbors he felt even more embarrassed. Especially when the 3 women in his house saw this, he felt even more aggrieved. He crawled up and picked up a wooden stool, wanting to fight the hoodlums to the death. The leader of the group, the green-skinned scoundrel, had practiced martial arts for many years. He had a lot of skills, so why would he care about a wooden stool? He used a kick and the wooden stool was split in half. Shopkeeper's son, who was full of hot-blooded blood, was dumbfounded. Just as he was hesitating whether or not to go to the kitchen and get a kitchen knife, a skinny scoundrel sneaked up behind him and kicked him in the butt, causing him to fall flat on his face. The skinny scoundrel's cheekbones were prominent, and his eyes were small and deep. Usually when the gangs fought they would use their mouths instead of their hands. He felt that this sneak attack was quite heroic, but it was a pity that he stretched his leg too far, causing his leg to cramp. He could only limp to the side, which attracted a lot of ridicule. The skinny scoundrel was about to flip out, but from the corner of his eyes he saw that the leader of the gang who had stolen the limelight was frowning. He immediately shut his mouth and retreated to the side. Su Fengnian put down Tao Manwu and walked to the green-skinned scoundrel while holding his hand. He very nimbly handed over a few 10 taels banknotes and said with a smile, "This leader, I don't know how brother's son was disrespectful. I hope that you can give me a chance to spend money to avoid disaster." He didn't have to give face to anyone, but he had to give face to money. The green-skinned scoundrel, who had a ferocious black tiger tattooed on his arm, coldly asked, "Brat, which gang are you from?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "This lowly one cannot compare to First Master's domineering demeanor and is only doing odd jobs for the City Lord Mansion's second young master. I'm not considered anyone important. Second young master took a fancy to this restaurant's 5 sprouts soup, and as a result, I developed a friendship with Manager Sunday. Thus, I came here to ask for this restaurant's signature vegetarian dish. First Master is magnanimous, so please forgive Manager Sunday. If this lowly one fails in this matter, even if second young master hears about it, the restaurant will not be in the right. Second young master has a lot of matters to attend to, so he absolutely won't care about such trivial matters. However, if this lowly one fails in this matter and does not leave a good impression on second young master, then this lowly one will be miserable and won't be able to obtain even half a copper coin's worth of profit. Therefore, these 30 to 40 taels of silver can be considered as a token of my respect to First Master. First Master is benevolent and does not cut off this lowly one's path to wealth. What do you think?" The leader's face was gloomy and uncertain. In the end, he smiled and put the banknotes into his pocket. He patted Su Fengnian's shoulder and said, "Since little brother has admitted his mistake, this matter isn't a big deal. I'll give you face and let it go. In the future, when you go to the western part of the city, find me for a drink. It's simple, just say the name of Flying Fox Town's Guanxi." The commotion died down, and the immortals who were watching from the sidelines also dispersed and entered the restaurant. Manager's son, who was still in a state of shock, asked in a low voice, "Brother Su, are you really a noble of the City Lord's mansion?" Su Fengnian picked a clean table and sat down. He said with a smile, "How could I be related to the City Lord's mansion? It's just that there are some elders in my family who have some business dealings with the mansion's steward. I'm not familiar with the second young master of the Tantai family. This time I went to the city lord's mansion and shamelessly put myself under the guise of an assassin. I don't know if I'll be able to meet the second young master. Brother Sun, you know that my family is in the business of porcelain, but the second young master is an expert in this field. If I'm lucky enough to be recognized by him, I might be able to drag the second young master to the restaurant for a meal. Manager Sun's mind calmed down. He rubbed his hands and said with relief, I don't dare to accept the second young master's money. It's already a great honor to be able to come to the restaurant. Brother Su, today's matter is all thanks to your righteous help. I'll go get the money to pay you back. Also, no matter how long you stay in the inn, as long as it costs money, I'll take care of it. If you don't agree, I'll be angry with you. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment, then said with a smile, Brother Sun, don't haggle over the 30 or 40 taels of silver with me. I'm the descendant of a merchant who went to Guanghan House. If you're stubborn, you won't recognize me as your brother. In the future, as long as I go to Flying Fox City, I'll definitely come to your place to eat and drink. I won't be careless about this. I'm not joking with you, so don't feel bad. The anger in Manager Sun's chest was swept away and he laughed heartily. After sitting down, he waved to his wife and daughter who were standing in the distance and said, Come say hello to Brother Su. Chapter 454. Even the little girl who despised Su Fengnian for being too old, along with her mother and elder sister, respectfully bowed to him. The three girls were like raindrops on a pear blossom. Having survived a calamity, they were grateful to Su Fengnian. Not to mention, it seemed that this handsome young master with a saber had some connections with the city lord manor. This made them feel that Manager Sun had such a young master who called him brother, and that they shared his glory with him. The eldest daughter was originally embarrassed that her father had been beaten to the ground in 2 or 3 moves. She wished she could dig a hole and hide in it. But now she only felt that her father was brave and had the ability to recognize people. She didn't have the slightest bit of complaint. As a businesswoman, Manager Sun's wife was even more worldly and clever. She personally returned with a pot of good wine and poured wine for her husband and Su Fengnian. She wanted to strike while the iron was hot and tie this noble young master to the restaurant. In the future, if there were any conflicts with those green-skinned men, he wouldn't have to charge and break through enemy lines, but at least he wouldn't have to watch from the sidelines. Manager Sun's youngest daughter was still in a daze. When her elder sister pinched her arm, she raised her head and saw her mother give her a meaningful glance. She mouthed the words Tantai's eldest young master. The little girl immediately became spirited. She didn't care about anything else and anxiously asked, Brother Su, if you go to the city lord manor, will you be able to see Tantai's eldest young master? If you see him, you must remember to mention me. My name is Sun Xiaochun. The little girl's arm was pinched again. She immediately came to her senses and said with a smile, There's also my elder sister. She's called Sun Jiqiu. Manager Sun and his wife looked at each other and smiled. They felt somewhat helpless towards their daughter who had gone mad. The two sisters' eyes were filled with hope and expectation. They didn't care about being reserved or shy. Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. He could only nod and say, If there's a chance, I'll definitely put in a few good words for you too. But I can't guarantee that I'll be able to see that heroic young master. The elder sister, Sun Jiqiu, was older and knew more about the ways of the world. She smiled and nodded. The younger sister, Sun Xiaochun, had a serious expression. She said with a deadpan expression, You must see him. Their mother pretended to slap the little girl, but her tone was gentle, Don't be rude. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Sister-in-law, it's fine, it's just a small matter. Afterwards, the three women went into the room to talk about some private matters. Shopkeeper Sun, on the other hand, had a complacent smile on his face as he chatted with a few of his old friends who had rushed over after hearing the news. Su Fengnian returned to his room at the inn. Tao Manwu put away the Chi-Chiao box, opened his bag and counted the silver pieces one by one. Su Fengnian laughed and scolded, If there really was a thief, would he only steal a few pieces of silver? You stole them all long ago. The little girl, who was good at running a household, glared back at him and continued to count the money. With his back to Tao Manwu, Su Fengnian steered a flying sword from the silkworm armor 12 scabbard, and secretly nurtured it. After counting the silver pieces, not a single one was missing. Tao Manwu tied up his bag, kicked off his boots, and arranged the Qiqiao box and a porcelain pillow. He rested his head on the bed and looked left and right, his eyes full of joy. Su Fengyan hid the flying sword and looked at his palms, where the calluses were gradually peeling off after fusing with the big yellow courtyard. Ordinary people used their blood to nurture a sword. Not to mention 12, even 2 or 3 swords would be enough to make their hands unsightly. However, with the big yellow courtyard, growing the longevity lotus, there was no need to worry. His qi and blood were as vigorous as the tides of Guangling. Su Fengyan sat on the edge of the bed, his body leaning back and his eyes closed in concentration. Tao Manwu was in a dilemma, but in the end he generously stuffed the porcelain pillow under the back of his head. Holding the Qiqiao box with a small spider web inside, he sat up and looked at the guy beside him, wanting to say something but hesitating. Su Fengyan, with his eyes closed, calmly asked, "Do you want to know why I could have taught those scoundrels a lesson, but instead humbly gave them money and settled the matter peacefully?" The little girl nodded and pouted, feeling a little wronged and resentful. She felt that this guy lacked even the slightest bit of chivalry. Su Fengyan's lips curled up and he softly said, "I'm a scoundrel, but I'm a rootless duckweed floating wherever I go. Shopkeeper Sun's family of 4 are ordinary people who have taken root here and can't leave for the rest of their lives. The green-skinned goods of Flying Fox City are clever and cunning. To put it nicely, they judge the situation and size up the situation. To put it bluntly, they bully the weak and fear the strong. Unless I kill them once, they won't let Shopkeeper Sun off easily. But I have a private matter to attend to, and I also have a burden like you who can only help me carry the money. I can't possibly fight over such a small matter. In the end, each family's misfortune and fortune will be their own. Today I only helped because of the pot of tea and because I was afraid that I would have to go through the trouble of moving to another place. Otherwise, with my fickle personality, I wouldn't have bothered to pretend to be a good person. This is called, each family sweeps the snow in front of their own door, ignoring the frost on the roof of others' roof. If you want to find a hero who can help those in distress to travel the Jianghu with you, then I'm sorry, little girl. I'm sure I'll disappoint you." Tao Manwu weakly snorted. When she saw him teaching the Pipa playing elder sister at the tea house, she felt that he wasn't so bad. Now she felt that he wasn't that good after all. Su Fengyan held the little girl's arm and quietly unblocked her acupuncture points. He sarcastically said, "Good people have good karma. That's just a saying that people are afraid of disaster. In fact, not many people are willing to be good people. Generally speaking, good people don't have good karma. It's just that no one has the opportunity to let you know." Tao Manwu only felt that her arm was hot. It wasn't comfortable or uncomfortable, so she endured it. Su Fengyan calmly said, "Change your arm." She turned around and stretched out her arm. After Su Fengyan succeeded, he teased, "They all say that men and women shouldn't touch each other. You don't have any shame." Tao Manwu ignored this and sighed like an old man. She bit her lip and said, "Uncle Dong said that a country's weapon should not be shown to others. A gentleman hides his weapon and waits for the right moment to move. A villain holds his weapon and clamors non-stop." Su Fengyan opened his eyes and said with a smile, "Your Uncle Dong is a knowledgeable person. Isn't he very similar to me?" The little girl rolled her eyes. She was too lazy to talk to this scoundrel who flattered himself. She just wanted to take back her beloved porcelain pillow. Su Fengyan pressed down on the porcelain pillow and said shamelessly, "I'm not giving it back." The little girl knew that she couldn't compete in strength, so she showed a disdainful expression. After spending so much time with this scoundrel, she seemed to have learned some small skills to make herself more comfortable. Tao Manwu curiously put on his boots and ran to the window, standing on his tiptoes to see what was going on. Flying Fox City was dumbfounded. It was said that the eldest son of Tantai Station was beaten up by a damn fatty. What was even more infuriating was that this damn fatty had a beautiful daughter by his side. Judging from her posture, she was the fatty's little wife. More than 100 valiant iron cavalry rode straight into Flying Fox City. The iron hooves crushed all the women in the city. Later, the well-informed high-ranking officials and dignitaries in Flying Fox City turned from anger to fear. The damn fatty who broke into the city without following the law was not only a real military general, but also a leading figure in the military circle of the southern officials in Beimang. He was the most exceptional second-grade general in Beimang in the past 30 years. He was only one step away from the 3 third-grade generals in the south. Not to mention the governor, no one in Dragon Waste province where the border army was weak, would dare to offend this damn fatty except for those who held the provincial edict. Afterwards, shocking news entered their ears one after another, making them even more frightened to the point of pissing their pants. The woman in colorful clothes at the damn fatty's side was the daughter of one of the northern Mang's 5 great sex weapon-carrying mountain master, as well as the damn fatty's second wife. Meanwhile, this damned fatty's first wife had an even more extraordinary background. No wonder she could suppress the weapon-carrying mountain's precious young miss. The eldest son of Tantai Station only blocked the city gate with his men, but the soldiers and horses were scattered. The eldest son himself was forced off his horse by the fairy who came down from Bing Tea Mountain. For a time the city was in turmoil. There was only a tea house far away from the quarrels. People listened to the stories of the eldest son of Baoyang's travels told by the blind storyteller and paid no attention to the outside world. An old Confucian scholar who had just entered the city sat by the window. He ordered a pot of cheap tea and placed a worn-out bookcase by his feet. Opposite him sat a middle-aged man with a sword on his back with a solemn expression. Sword Chi approached. Chapter 455. Hundreds of cavalrymen charged into the city, clad in heavy armor. The fat general in the lead weighed at least 100 kilograms, but he didn't give off the feeling of being a burden at all. His body was strong, his skin was dark, and his mount was also a heavy black horse. The cavalrymen behind him galloped in a straight line. Beside the fat general, there was a delicate woman riding side by side. She had a lively temperament and her colorful clothes fluttered in the wind, making her look like a fairy. The young woman wore a dark and serene green skirt with a soft and delicate yellow inner garment, which was exquisite and elegant. An ancient sword with a peacock green scabbard hung on her waist. Even when she galloped with the Baimang's No. 1 cavalryman, she didn't look like a vase at all, which made the fat general's personal cavalryman look even more majestic. The Baimang dynasty had a vast territory, but ever since the Liang dynasty unified the spring and autumn period, it had launched 6 grand wars with all its might, but only one of them involved the central line of the Dragon Waste state. The main battlefields were the eastern line of the 2 Liao provinces, and the western line of the Baimang Gusai province and the Liang Liangzhou province, which was 100 steps away from Flying Fox City. The fat man slowed down his horse and looked up at the hanging sword pavilion. The travel-worn fat man spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm and cursed in a low voice. The cavalrymen behind him moved as if they were one person, and the distance between the horse's legs didn't change because of the slow speed. The fat man's surname was Dong. His father was a scholar left behind by the spring and autumn period, and his mother was a girl from a small family in Baimang. After joining the army for more than 10 years, the fat man Dong had turned his 200 kilograms of fat into muscles. He had become the most dazzling military hero of the Baimang Southern Dynasty. He was even on the same level as the governor of Gusai province, the 3 great generals, and the important ministers of the Southern Dynasty. According to the laws of Baimang, even if the officials of the Southern Dynasty and the ministers of the Northern Dynasty had the same rank, their ranks would still be lowered by 1 rank. Only the nobles of the Southern Dynasty who had been specially rewarded by the Empress of Baimang could have their ranks increased by half a rank. This fat man was the only person in the Baimang dynasty who had been specially rewarded by the Empress of Baimang. Therefore, even though he was supposed to be a rank 4 general, his military power had risen to rank 2. The 3 great generals of the Western Front, Huang Songpu, Lu Gui, Yang Yunzan, and Gusai Jinsi, who could make the border tremble with just a sneeze, had all been cursed by this fat man. Among them, he had even slammed the table with Huang Songpu, who had been specially rewarded by the Empress of Baimang. It was even rumored that he had rolled up his sleeves and had a fight with Yang Yunzan. It was a miracle that the fat man was still alive today. Fatty Dong gnashed his teeth in anger. How did that old turtle Murong Baoding manage the little bastards in his clan? Murong Zhangtai had already given him a secret letter, but he still dared to lead his private army to rob his brother, sister-in-law, and niece. Did he really think that he could sit back and relax just because he was ranked 9th on the martial roll? Putting aside the murder of his sister-in-law, if anything happened to his niece, who he regarded as his own daughter, then this old man would fight with Murong Baoding to death for the rest of his life. If any of the descendants of Murong Baoding's branch came to Gusai province to steal military merits in the future, Then I'll make sure to beat them up so badly that even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them when they crawled back home. Along the way as they approached Flying Fox City, there were already several groups of scouts roaming around and spying on them from half a li away. Fatty Dong did not pay any attention to them at all. With these guys' horsemanship and combat strength, any one of the cavalrymen behind him could easily shoot them down. In terms of the killing ability of the horse bars and the scouts, only the white horse wandering crossbows trained by Qin Jibao could compare with his crowbars. Politeness demands reciprocity. After so many years of fighting to the death with real swords and spears, the odds of victory and defeat were always 50-50. Fatty Dong grinned, which made him look even more sinister. He knew that he wasn't a romantic, elegant, and kind person. Before he joined the army, the children in the neighborhood would be scared and cry when they saw him. Other than men who had similar interests, he hadn't been liked by many women or children in his life. Therefore, whenever he met a woman, Fatty Dong would cherish her very much. There were only 2 women and both of them had become his wives. The outside world said that Fatty Dong treated both the first and second wives equally. Anyway, the one who became the official daughter-in-law of the Dong family first would be the first daughter-in-law, and the one who married into the family later would be the second daughter-in-law. This was called first come, first served. Anyway, this old man didn't like to be reasonable. The one beside me was the sweetheart of that old man, Bu Bang Shan. Wasn't she also taken home by me? Every 2 or 3 days that old fellow disdained my martial prowess as unsightly. Motherf **Ker, what the hell do you know about the art of war? The pinnacle of martial prowess is no more than fighting 1,000 men. This old man is a match for 10,000 men. I've long disliked you, old man. Don't rely on your father-in-law's status as a martial grandmaster to make a ruckus. This old man respects the old and loves the young. I won't bicker with you. At most, I'll just pat your butt and turn around to tidy up your daughter in the middle of the night. This is called everything has its vanquisher. When the woman beside Fatty Dong saw that all too familiar smiling face, she helplessly said, "Husband, are you up to no good again? Who's going to suffer this time?" The damned Fatty laughed and said, "Your husband has always won people over with virtue and has always been kind to others." The beautiful woman with wide sleeves that fluttered like an immortal from the heavens wrinkled her brows. "You like that Tao man with so much? In the future you probably won't be so nervous about the children of me and that person, right?" Fatty Dong chuckled and said, "You're treating me like an outsider. Tao Man Wu is the only child that your husband truly likes in this life. He's also eldest brother's orphan. What's wrong with feeling a little heartache? It's fine if you don't get along with the princess of Great Yong. It's normal for women to be jealous. But it's not good for you to be blindly jealous of a child. If there's no one around, your husband will have to serve you according to the family rules and spank your butt." The woman whose father was the mountain chieftain of Mount Banbing originally wanted to snort coldly to express her slight dissatisfaction. However, she saw that he had been rushing day and night, resting every day only because he was exhausted and had no choice but to take a nap. Wiping his face with a wet cloth could wipe away several layers of dust, and his lips had long since become chapped and dripping with blood. In order to find that young niece of his who had gone missing from the Duckhead Green Inn, he had mobilized almost all of his connections and resources to rely on the bits and pieces of information that he had found, desperately chasing after clues. This was the first time she had seen him muster such an unscrupulous force other than fighting wars and abducting wives. Seeing his thin and sunken cheeks, her heart softened and she couldn't bear to use words to oppose him. He changed the topic. Seeing the soldiers in armor outside the city gates, she narrowed her eyes and softly asked, "Isn't Tantai Zhongping your good brother in private? Why did he obstruct you?" Chapter 456. Fatty Dong yawned. He was very familiar with digging holes for the border generals and not burying them. Maybe it would take a few years for them to realize what had happened. If they wanted to scold this sinister and cunning Fatty again, they would not have the heart to do so. However, Fatty Dong had always been honest with his wife. He explained, "If Chongping was an official in the Southern Dynasty, it would be a good thing to be close to me. But if he went to the imperial tent and flirted with me again, His Majesty the Emperor wouldn't mind, but the Yelu and Murong families would gossip. It would not be a good thing after all. I might as well use a trick that could not fool the old fox but could fool many idiots. At least everyone's face would be okay. At the same time, I would let the North know that there was a young man in Flying Fox City who dared to compete with Fatty Dong. The position of Prince Chuan would be set in stone. You've been spoiled by your father. You don't like to use your brain and are much more stupid than her. Wife, don't glare at me. I know that your eyes are beautiful. Back then I was mesmerized by your gaze and lost my soul. Besides, it's good to be stupid. Everyone is as smart as her. As her husband, I am tired. It's better to be stupid. Let me give you an example. Let me say this first. It's just a big example. My husband and his brothers went to a brothel to drink wine. When he returned home, she smelled the wine and wanted him to kneel on a washboard. You, on the other hand, were happy with the rouge your husband bought. Tell me, which one do you think I like more? The woman smiled sweetly, but there was a murderous intent in her smile. Fatty Dong slapped his own mouth. Therefore, the good show that was originally planned to fight dozens of rounds with Tantai Zhongping turned into the future Prince Chuan of the Bell being knocked off his horse by the flower stuck in cow dung. When Fatty Dong entered the city, he sighed and said, I'm sorry, brother Chongping. It's all your sister-in-law's fault for being in a bad mood. The woman's expression did not change at all. She asked softly, Husband, how do we find your niece next? Fatty Dong went out of the city gate. He used his hand to block the sunlight and said calmly, Seal the city. Then scour the city. When you find me, you will leave the city. The woman said worriedly, Husband, aren't you afraid of attracting criticism? Fatty Dong curled his lips and sneered, If anyone is not convinced, then come and argue with me. I will slowly reason with them. If I can't win, then I will crush them with my cavalry. The two bodyguards behind him were closer. When they heard the general's words, they smiled knowingly. That's right. Our General Dong didn't have any ink in his stomach, but he liked to pretend to be cultured and reasonable with others. Most of the time when he couldn't argue with others, he would jump and curse. If he still couldn't vent his anger, he would get physical. The officials of the Southern Dynasty hated this shameless bastard. Especially during the Spring Festival, General Dong, whose calligraphy was distorted like an earthworm, still insisted on showing off his talent. He went through doors and doors and shamelessly asked those Southern Dynasty mansions to hang the Spring Festival couplets he wrote. He knew nothing and made a fool of himself. Once, the supervisor and the observer of the Southern Dynasty played tricks. One said that the wind blew away the Spring Festival couplets, while the other said that the couplets were ruined by setting off firecrackers. In the end, the next day, Fatty Dong carried 2 Spring Festival couplets on his shoulders and went to hang them on the doors of 2 powerful military officials. He personally glued them with porridge and soup and said with a smile that this time the couplets wouldn't be blown away by the wind or blown away by the firecrackers. In the vast western capital, where there were as many influential officials as there were dogs, only General Huang Songpu dared to directly block this fatty outside the door. The gatekeeper pointed to a stone tablet at the door. It clearly stated that Dong Zhuo was not allowed to come within 50 steps of the mansion. In the northern Mang and southern dynasties, perhaps other than the border soldiers, only Great General Lu Gui was close to this repulsive fatty. In the end, Great General Lu Gui had the intention of betrothing his granddaughter to him 2 years ago, but the fatty used the fact that he had a fierce wife as an excuse. In the end, he married the mountain lord's only daughter a few days later. It was rumored that the old General Lu Gui was so furious that his hair stood on end, nearly donning his armor and mounting his horse to slaughter this black-bellied fatty. The woman said softly, "If you knew this would happen, why didn't you personally escort sister-in-law and niece to Luqing?" Fatty Dong said gloomily, "That sister-in-law doesn't seem like a woman who can stay a widow for Brother Tao. I've never been close to her, so why would I want to see her? Right after Brother Tao died, she wrote to me to ask for a list of official titles for her son. I have a strange temper. If you ask for it, I won't give it to you. If you don't ask for it, I don't mind helping you pave the way. Brother Tao only has one son. If she raises him, sooner or later he'll become a playboy who eats, drinks and plays. He's not promising at all. If it were up to me, he would have been thrown into my army. If he could survive and become a member of the Crow's Nest, he'd have your Uncle Dongzhu's wealth and he'd have a bright future. But would that woman be willing to do that? Wouldn't she be worried to death and stab me in the back? That nephew's temperament doesn't follow Brother Tao's but his mother's. Therefore I only like young man Wu. I, Dongzhu, swore that I wouldn't visit old Corporal Wu until I became a first-class general or minister in Beimang." Fatty Dong snorted coldly, "As long as I find young man Wu, I'll make sure that my youngest daughter can live more freely than any princess or infanta. Whoever dares to bully her must be tired of living." The woman rubbed her black hair and said softly, "From the news, it's a young man with a saber who's traveling in Dragon Waste State who kidnapped young man Wu. When you meet him, how are you going to deal with him?" Fatty Dong's expression eased a little and he said with a smile, "I don't care who he is or what his identity is. As long as he doesn't let young man Wu down, as long as he dares to ask, I'll dare to pay him." The woman from Bubang Mountain said with a smile, "That's what I like about my husband." Fatty Dong laughed and said, "Wife, I like a lot of things about you." The woman who was born to live at the top of Jianghu and enjoyed the scenery, was born to be indifferent to the world. Only to Fatty Dong, who was her nemesis, she threw a coquettish glance that only showed her true love. Fatty Dong squinted his eyes and looked at the city. He didn't like this flying fox city. It was too effeminate and annoying. When the cavalry entered the city, they didn't go straight to the mayor's mansion. Instead, they symbolically circled the city and passed by a restaurant in the northeast corner. The woman suddenly turned her head and looked at the window upstairs. Fatty Dong wondered, "What's the matter?" The woman thought for a while and shook her head. Fatty Dong thought that there was a playboy who coveted his wife and didn't take it seriously. If it was a normal day, he could beat him to death. But now he really didn't have the mood to do so. He only brought 100 cavalry and he couldn't look for young man Wu all over the city like a headless fly. In the end, he still needed the help of the government. Dong Zhuo exhaled a long breath and said softly, "Young man Wu, wait for Uncle Dong for a while." F***ck, that damn Win8 system, it made me lose 2,000 words of my manuscript. This one should have been 6,000 words. The next chapter will be at 2 or 3 in the morning. Chapter 457. The blind storyteller had to tell the story of the heir of Baoyang's travels 3 times a day. 3 times was already the limit of the old man's physical strength. No matter how stubborn he was, he couldn't compete with the heavens. Maybe one day the heavens would be unhappy and take his life. Moreover, the storyteller could only move his lips and drink a few mouthfuls of wine to moisten his throat. His granddaughter who played the pipa had to suffer a lot. Her life was poor and she couldn't bear to spend money to use the peach rubber finger protector. After only one storytelling session, the little girl's 10 fingers were bruised and blue. Now that she was resting, she was afraid that her grandfather would be worried, so she only dared to secretly rub the corners of her clothes to ease the pain in her fingers. The shopkeeper of the tea house saw the second group of customers enter the tea house in high spirits. They sat behind the counter and happily sipped tea from the spout. Doing a small business related to eating was all about the flow of people. If the old customers didn't leave, the new customers wouldn't come. The shopkeeper subconsciously glanced at the customers at the table by the window and no longer paid attention to them. The old scholar seemed to have made up his mind to listen to another storytelling session. He tactfully asked for a pot of tea from the tea house's waiter. He didn't drink much, but most of the tea was smeared on the table by him. The man with the sword didn't look sideways. He was like a clay bodhisattva in a small temple. His chi cultivation was first class. The old scholar smiled and said, "Xiaopu, want to drink a cup?" The middle-aged man shook his head and respectfully said, "I don't dare." The old scholar seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. He pointed at the junior and said, "Even Li Mibi dared to openly assassinate him. Is there anything in the world that you, Sun Xiaopu, don't dare to do?" The man with the sword didn't smile, nor did he know how to joke. He said seriously, "Then let's drink a cup." The old scholar shook his head and said, "I won't let you drink, you idiot." The old man rubbed his cheeks and said slowly, "I scolded old Li for having evil intentions and wanting to bring disaster to Beimang for 100 years. He scolded me for being pedantic and unworthy of being the emperor's teacher. These are all disputes in the court under the emperor's eyes. They are all on the table and can barely be called disputes between gentlemen. Xiaopu, don't go to Li Mibi's side in the future. A saber only has a single edge and its foundation is biased. Therefore it is a sharp weapon for killing people. A sword, however, has 2 peaks and is neither biased nor biased. A gentleman entering the world to save people is the correct path of the sword. In a dynasty, both sides complement each other. There is no lack of martial artists who wield sabers and swords who wield swords. You are the master of the sword mansion of the chess and sword music school after all. If you personally fight and kill, the school will lose its glory. You have to rely on the talented juniors to earn your reputation. You have to rely on the support of the few of you. Just as the storyteller said, Li Chungang is the #1 in the way of the sword. In my opinion, This sword god's sheathed sword has thousands of sword wills in his heart even if he doesn't draw his sword. He is far more perfect than the two-sleeved green snake in the sword that opens the gate of heaven. Xiaopu, you should learn from him. The middle-aged man nodded. He was only convinced by one person in his life. The old man left Beimang alone and rushed to the south before the situation of the Central Plains was settled. After the unification of the spring and autumn period, he stayed in the foreign land where the smoke of war gradually dissipated for a full 20 years. The man with the sword was famous for his sword qi. Hong Jingyan, who was at the top of the martial arts ranking, was his closed-door disciple. The old scholar listened to the next two storytellers without missing a word, sometimes nodding and sometimes shaking his head. In any case, no one except for a rather dignified swordsman sitting at the same table would care about the life or death of an ordinary-looking stinky scholar. During this period, two groups of ruffians from Flying Fox City came to make trouble. The first group was sent back by the tea house manager with money. The second group was much more vicious. The old storyteller, who was fiercely protecting his granddaughter holding the pipa, was punched in the face. As a result, the crowd was outraged. The customers paid for their tea and waited to hear a few good stories. You ruffians can be unreasonable, but don't hit the old man's face. If you hurt him, wouldn't you have wasted your copper coins to buy tea and listen to the storyteller? The ruffians said harshly. If they dared to boast about how heroic the heir of Bailiang was again, they would come back and give them a good beating. Then they swaggered away. At the end of the third storytelling session, a few handsome horses came to the outside of the tea house. A few disciples of the Flying Fox town jumped off the horses and rushed at the blind old man with 6 or 7 evil servants. A disciple of an official's family even pulled the little girl's hair with a ferocious smile and threatened to throw the little young barbarian into the lowest brothel to be a whore. The old scholar's face was as usual. People fight with people and each depends on his own ability. Life and death are predestined. This old man wants to make a fuss about the fight between officials and people. Xiaopu. In an instant, the man with a sword on his back who heard the order did not unsheath his sword, but the sword qi was close. The old scholar did not look at the bloody scene. He stretched out his sleeve to wipe off the map of the border between the two dynasties that was densely covered like an ant's nest on the table. He whispered in a hoarse voice, "In the past 20 years, I have been a businessman who haggled over every penny, a farmer who lost his home, a night watchman, a henchman who buried himself in writing documents for the officials, a writer for the famous prostitutes in the brothel, an escort who traveled north and south, a writer for the famous scholars, a county magistrate in a small town, and so on. I have done all kinds of things. I have also traveled through the 9 kingdoms of the spring and autumn period. If I spend another 2 or 3 years traveling through the 8 provinces of Beimang, I can probably go to the imperial city and play a big chess game for His Majesty." The old scholar said flatly, Huang Sanjia, you use the 9 kingdoms of the Central Plains as a chessboard, and I use the 2 dynasties to divide black and white. You are about to lose 1 rank. The old scholar suddenly laughed and said, "You already have 1 foot in the coffin, yet you are still so focused on winning. It's not good." In the inn, Su Fengyan saw Tao Manwu, who had just stood on tiptoe to look outside the window, suddenly shrink back as if she had seen a ghost in broad daylight. She trotted to the bedside, took off her boots and jumped to his side. She hugged the strange box with a complicated expression on her little face. Su Fengyan joked, "What? You didn't really see your Uncle Dong, did you? That doesn't make sense. If it were me, I would have already shouted and jumped down the stairs." The little girl raised the box in her hand and tilted her head. She said timidly and seriously, "If the little spiders in the box spin a web tomorrow, you have to promise me one thing, okay?" Su Fengyan bluntly refused. "Do you think I am stupid? If you want me to meet your Uncle Dong who has outstanding military achievements, or if you want me to carry that money bag in the future, do you think I will agree?" The little girl was still holding the small wooden box, about to cry. Su Fengyan said angrily, "Go away, don't try to seduce me. There really isn't such a beautiful girl in the world." After hesitating for a moment, Su Fengyan said self-mockingly, "Even if there is, it is not a silly girl like you who is only 4, 5, 6, or 7 years old." Su Fengyan wanted to get out of bed to see what was going on, but he found that she was tugging on his sleeve. He looked down and saw that the little girl's eyes were wet, as if a flood was about to burst out of a dam. Su Fengyan had a keen sense of hearing. Naturally, he could tell that it was the movement of 100 elite cavalries crossing the street outside the building. There were very few people in the Flying Fox City who were qualified to make such a big move. Tantai Zhangping was one of them. However, the eldest son of the city's official had always been reserved, so he would not bring an army to the northeast corner of the city to show off. Connecting this to Tao Manwu's strange expression, the truth was revealed. She was just an ignorant little girl who had only known each other for less than a month, so what kind of unforgettable feelings could there be? Su Fengyan felt like she would just suffer a bit of pain for a while. Once she saw that Uncle Dong who had a meteoric rise in northern Mang's political arena, it wouldn't take long for her to forget about him. Just how many oaths of undying love were nothing more than this. In reality, the two of them were entangled in gratitude and grudges, one big and one small. This kind of affection couldn't withstand a few blows of wind and rain. Chapter 458. Su Fengyan did not expose the truth that was close to the truth. He said softly, I intend to entrust you to Tantai Chang'an. Later, I will ask shopkeeper Sun to take you to the bottle alley. Stay in Shi first. After that, you can tell the second son of the city overseer to come to the restaurant for a meal. It was hard to tell whether the second son of the city overseer was a loser or not. However, according to Tantai Chang'an's temperament, he would probably treat a little girl who could not cause any trouble well. Of course, this was not a foolproof plan. However, Su Fengyan could only do this because of the situation. As for whether Tao Manwu would reveal his identity or give Tantai Chang'an to Fatty Dong after getting along for a period of time, it would be a good thing for the city overseer's mansion and the little girl. Su Fengyan was destined to go deep into the hinterland of Beimang alone and even to the distant northern region. It was impossible for him to take a little girl to the end of the world. It was not a fun thing to do. Maybe one day she would become a burden and be abandoned as an abandoned child. Finally, she would die under unknown weapons. No matter how Su Fengyan agreed with the hypocrisy of the world and how cruel and ruthless he was, he did not think it was a trivial matter to watch her die an unnatural death. The little girl turned her head and said angrily, No. I won't tell you if I go. I'll be a mute. Su Fengyan smiled and said, It's up to you whether you go or not. The little girl nodded heavily. Su Fengyan flicked her forehead and said, You will hate me one day. Then you will know how hard it is to part peacefully now. Tao Manwu picked up the porcelain pillow and wanted to hit the big bad guy. However, when he saw his eyes, he did not dare to do so. He was afraid that he would cry out loud. The little girl turned over and threw herself on the bed. First, she hugged the porcelain pillow and Chi Chiao under her body. Then she hurriedly covered her body with the quilt and hid to sob secretly. I hate you right now, she said in a soft and indistinct voice. She wanted to cry and scold him, and she was also sulking under the quilt. The little girl must be very tired. Su Fengyan waited for a while. Seeing that she did not stop, he sighed, took the quilt and threw it aside. Then he held her in his arms and put his chin on her head. He said softly, Don't you want to see your Uncle Dong every day and want him to teach me a lesson? Why are you so shy when you see him? No. The little girl covered her face and her slender shoulders gently twitched. She said intermittently, Uncle Dong is a good man. I won't let him beat you. Su Fengyan shook his head and said, Fighting or not is a small matter. He did not continue. Since the fatty Dong Zhou had entered Flying Fox City with 100 cavalrymen, Su Fengyan would not only be afraid of him but also want to kill him. Killing Dong Zhou would have a more far-reaching impact than killing Ten Tao Qianji. However, since the fatty was an important minister of the southern dynasty, Su Fengyan was not interested in whether the little spider in the little girl's Chi Chiao box spun a web. However, the Beimang spider web behind the fatty was very likely to slowly spread out inside and outside Flying Fox City. Su Fengyan wanted to kill a popular military official who must be protected by men of sacrifice and retreat successfully. Without the Finger Mystery Realm, it was impossible for him to succeed. Thinking of this, Su Fengyan felt a little guilty. What did the little girl do in her last life to meet him in this life? Tao Manwu said softly, My father said that if a deserter on the battlefield he would be beheaded. Su Fengyan pinched her cheek and spat, Don't say such unlucky things. After a long silence, Tao Manwu cried until she had no strength left. She clutched the sleeves of the big bad guy, afraid that he would leave. Su Fengyan looked at the bag of money on the table and said while rubbing his forehead, Okay, I owe you this. Our Taozi is so beautiful. Maybe she will be kidnapped by a scoundrel and become his wife. I don't feel at ease. Let's make a deal first. I will send you to Uncle Dong's place. Outside the courier station in Flying Fox City, Dong Zhuo, who had just rested for a short time, ran out with his eyes wide open. He was surprised and stunned. He had searched high and low for something but found it without any effort. This general, who had been sealed by the city overseer, saw a funny scene. A young man holding his little niece's hand with one hand and an inferior horse with the other hand appeared in front of him unexpectedly and unreasonably. Young man Wu was carrying a heavy bag and holding a porcelain pillow with one hand. She bit her lips and looked very wronged. Dong Zhuo's heart and liver were broken. Fortunately, young man Wu was safe. Dong Zhuo looked at him carefully. This fat fox, who had been dealing with the old foxes in the military and political circles all year round, had already cultivated a good sense of human nature. His eyes were like torches. He immediately felt jealous, like a father who saw his daughter bring a damned son-in-law to his house. Damn it, his little daughter was not even 10 years old. How could this bastard kill her? The fairy who came out of the Bing Mountains squinted at the young man, who she could not see clearly. He was empty-handed and had nothing on him. There was a long cloth bag tied near the saddle of the inferior horse, which should be a weapon similar to a broadsword. The more she could not figure out, the more she dared not take it lightly. Her family was well learned, her martial arts were good, and her eyesight was superb. She was not sure whether this calm young man was at level 3 or level 2. But when she saw her husband's embarrassed look, she felt relieved. She had seen her husband bully others many times, but this was the first time. Since this uninvited guest dared to bring young man Wu here, unless he was a reckless and lousy assassin like a moth darting into the flame, he was most likely a guest and not an enemy. She could not keep a straight face. After marrying into the Dong family, she had always kept in mind her mother's advice on the mountain. In addition to knowing how to turn a blind eye, she must make her husband proud. This was a smart woman. Tao Manwu looked back 3 times with every step. Su Fingyan turned over and mounted the horse. Fatty Dong laughed and said, "This hero who did a good deed without leaving his name, is he going out of the city?" Su Fingyan smiled and nodded. Fatty Dong rubbed his hands and said, "If there is something that is hard to say, it is not Dong Zhuo who is boasting. As long as it is not a big crime of rebellion, I can help you to intercede. If you don't like Dong Zhuo's reputation, it is not a problem. Dong Zhuo will remember today's kindness for the rest of his life." Seeing this young man slowly turn the horse's head, it seemed that he was determined to go out of the city. Dong Zhuo did not bother to be polite and said loudly, "Go to the city gate and pass a message. Open the city gate and let them go." Watching the man and the horse go away, Fatty Dong ran to Tao Manwu with a funny posture. Because he was too tall and burly, he simply knelt down and hugged the little girl. His wife wanted to say something but stopped. Dong Zhuo picked up young Manwu and put him on his shoulder to sit. He turned around and said with a smile, "I know what you want to say. Such a person left as he pleased. Of course I am very vigilant. However, it is better to do less immoral things like repaying kindness with evil. I have done enough shameful things in my life. If I give birth to a son who doesn't have a penis, who can I complain to? You 2 wives will beat me up from 200 pounds to 100 pounds. Do you think it is easy for me to gain a pound of flesh?" The woman smiled gracefully. The young man was generous, but compared to her, a narrow-minded man, he was still thousands of miles away. Dong Zhuo looked around and his eyes suddenly turned cold. He said gloomily, "Everyone, I have said that I will let them go, so I will let them go. You are watching me. I am in the wrong to bring my private army out of Gusai State. Moreover, I have my wife to comfort me along the way. I will bear with it. If you dare to trip that person up and do something unnecessary, don't blame me, Dong Zhuo, for being narrow-minded. I will even dig up the graves of your ancestors." After he finished speaking, Fat Man Dong asked in a soft voice, "Wife, is it appropriate to use superfluous words like drawing legs on a snake here?" The woman was used to it. She nodded and said, "It's okay." Almost at the same time, Su Fingyan and Dong Zhuo, these 2 men, turned their heads and looked at each other from a distance. If they met again, they did not know what kind of status they would have when they looked at each other. Announcing the first VIP subscription group in Snow. 16871655 group subscription screenshot. Chapter 459. When the people of Flying Fox City first heard that Dong Zhongping was going to seal the city, they wanted to cut off the fat man's flesh. However, the thunder was loud but the rain was small. Soon the city was reopened. The people thought that the eldest son of Tantai Zhongping must have gained the upper hand in the secret competition with Dong Zhongping. They didn't believe that Tantai Zhongping would be pushed back by a woman at the gate. Su Fengyan was not in a hurry to leave the city. Instead, he climbed the city wall and looked at the hanging sword pavilion from a distance. Because Tao Manwu was involved with Dong Zhuo, his plan had been disrupted. It was not appropriate to leave the city in a hurry. However, if he stayed in the city, it would be easier for him to be caught. Su Xiao wanted to find the old general of the Bailiang army by himself, so he had to put it aside for the time being. It was the lesser of two evils. He was mocking himself, but he still had some regrets. When Su Fengyan was about to turn around and walk down the city wall, a sloppy man who was sleeping soundly on the battlement murmured a few words. He then rolled sideways and was about to fall off the city wall. Fortunately, he fell into the wall, so Su Fengyan did not help him. The drunkard was not happy that he survived. Instead, he carefully stroked the wine gourd hanging on his waist. Only then did he raise his head and look around. When he saw Su Fengyan, he was indifferent. The drunkard with a full beard leaned against the wall and drank a mouthful of strong wine. He hummed a Bailiang song, "Take off his armor," leisurely. A tall but hunchbacked man in a servant's uniform trotted up the city wall with a flask of wine in his hand. When he saw Su Fengyan, he paused and silently filled his old half-empty flask with new wine. The servant was a pitiful cross-eyed man. The half-drunk man took out a dagger inlaid with pearls and shaved his face. As he was busy, he glanced sideways at Su Fengyan. He pointed at the hanging sword pavilion and scolded, "Young man, what are you looking at? I brought 2 swords to Flying Fox City. One is hung in the pavilion, and the other is sold to the city lord's mansion for 1,000 taels of gold. What right do you have to look at me like I'm a drunkard?" The servant was a mute. Seeing his master's lips, he knew that he was about to get into trouble again. He hurriedly turned to Su Fengyan to apologize. Su Fengyan smiled and waited for the drunkard to shave off his beard. He narrowed his eyes. No wonder he could sleep on the top of Feng Feng Lu for so many years when he was selling swords and painting. If his clothes were clean and tidy, he must have been a romantic and elegant man. There must be something wrong. Su Fengyan's expression was the same as usual. He leisurely looked at the top scorer of the brothel who could make such a beautiful girl unable to forget him. The drunkard took back his dagger and sighed. "I didn't let down the painting, but the painting misled me." He drank another mouthful of wine. Su Fengyan was not in the mood to beat around the bush. He asked directly, "Are you waiting for me?" The drunkard glanced at the servant as if he had heard a joke. He laughed and said, "Kid, you're talking big. I'm sleeping here comfortably. It's more like you're looking for me." Su Fengyan was desperate. He said calmly, "Someone asked me to pass a message. If you can understand it, then forget it. If you don't, then take it as a drunkard's words. They can go in one ear and out the other. Since he's a pawn you brought out, you have to go back and clean up his mess." The man who was still handsome after shaving rolled his eyes and said, "Is there something wrong with your head? When did I not clean up my mess after taking a dump? Get lost, get lost. If you don't get lost, I still have my swordsmanship. I'll take out the torch dragon hanging in the sword pavilion and send you to hell." Su Fengyan had checked the flow of qi. Neither the master nor the servant could be called a hermit master. The drunkard was barely above ordinary people. As for the cross-eyed servant, he was slightly inferior to ordinary people. Su Fengyan walked down the city wall with a smile. He took the inferior horse and left Flying Fox City. He looked back. There was no drunkard. There was only the cross-eyed servant standing there with a hunched back. The drunkard, who had been sitting on the ground and leaning against the wall, wiped the stubble on his cheeks and muttered to himself. Seeing that there was no response, he looked up and saw the servant standing there silently. The drunkard said self-deprecatingly, "I forgot that you're deaf and mute. When I was chased by my enemies, I ran north and fled to the border. If you didn't have some money, I wouldn't be willing to call you master and servant." The drunkard asked lazily, "Why do you want me to sleep on the city wall today?" A hoarse voice sounded, "Even a cripple like me can sense the sword energy approaching. There's a swordsman in Beimeng who has such a sword realm. He must be someone like the headmaster of the chess and sword music school." The drunkard was so scared that his hands and feet trembled. He asked dumbfoundedly, "You can talk?" The hunched servant was still looking into the distance. He reached out to touch his face and said calmly, "It's just a self-sealing acupoint. It's the best withered sword technique of the Wu family. Years ago I had a sword competition with Li Chungang. Then I was disheartened that the general didn't want to be the emperor. So I practiced the withered sword in peace. My ancestor once defeated 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords. 4 broken swords were left in Beimang. So I thought of coming here to take a look. Otherwise, with your mediocre swordsmanship, how could you pick up a fish spear and a torch dragon? Do you think famous swords are copper coins? You can pick up a few in the downtown area?" The drunkard asked in a trembling voice. "Who are you?" The servant's fingernails drew blood on his face. He seemed to hate this face and said slowly, "The withered sword is emotionless." Wuxia was tainted by love. Even if she pretended to enter the secular world, her sword intent was not pure. She was an immortal on earth in the palace back then, but it was only a fake realm. It was just an illusion. Otherwise, how could she fall ill? Consort of the king of Bailiang. My sister. My biological sister. However, I have never been close to her since I was young. Our relationship is even worse than her relationship with Dong Tai, who lived on Sword Mountain. Just like Qin Jibao and me, His Royal Highness is much better than that nephew of mine. However, no matter how close we are, our blood relationship cannot be denied. All these years I have been waiting for the general. I never thought that my nephew would come to Flying Fox City. General, you moved me with emotion and reason. But don't you know that I, Wu Qi, am the most emotionless and unreasonable person in my life? How do you know that Qin Jibao has never come to find me? It's too late. You don't kill me. I won't say anything. There are so many romantic people, but they all die because of romantic people. On this day the top scholar died drunk in Sword Pavilion. All the brothels in the city mourned and paid for the burial of this legendary man who made countless girls fall in love with him. Those middle-aged women whose children had already grown up were secretly grieving. To the north of Bailiang was Beimang. Bailiang was desolate, but its heart was not cold. In the past few years the battles in Liangmang had not been as grand. Most of the battles were between small groups of roaming cavalry. Bailiang's crossbowmen had become the most coveted type of soldier. To be able to cut off a few heads and hang them on the side of the saddle, even the old soldiers would be envious. Not to mention the hot-blooded new soldiers. This was a real meritorious service and could not be faked. Those rich playboys on the Eastern Front might even kill civilians and pass them off as Beimang barbarians. Bailiang's military law was strict, so they would not dare to do such a thing. One day, a group of Bailiang's crossbowmen went deep into the Beimang's territory and met with more than 20 strong and healthy Beimang barbarians on a narrow path. After a fierce battle, both sides suffered losses. After checking the corpses, they found out that they were Crow barbarians under Dongzhu's command. This made the ordinary crossbowman Li Hanlin, whose face was covered in blood, cry out in joy, but he also felt some lingering fear. Bailiang's military system consisted of 10 to 50 men. To be able to be a crossbowman's commander was more qualified than a general in the military. Li Hanlin's commander was an old and steady burly man. He wore light armor and his horsemanship was superb. Not only did he have extraordinary strength, he could also draw a bow with both hands and shoot. However, no matter how calm he was, whenever he saw a Beimang person his eyes would turn red. He had broken many military rules and had been demoted several times. Otherwise he would have become a general long ago. He was a man of few words, but every time his subordinates mentioned the incident where he was personally whipped by the general, the middle-aged man would grin. Li Hanlin and the other crossbowmen all knew that this was the commander's weakness. If they made a mistake, as long as they repeated this, the commander would be happy and soft-hearted. Li Hanlin rode on a horse with a deep wound on his arm. A Beimang barbarian's head was tied to his buttocks. Blood flowed down the side of the horse's back. In this small-scale battle they had lost 3 men and completely wiped out the enemy. The 3 corpses of their comrades were hung on the backs of the marksmen and 2 deputy marksmen's horses. This was an unshakable rule in the army. On the battlefield of Bailiang, the most important thing was to return the corpses of the dead. As long as there was still a breath left in them, they had to return with their fallen comrades as long as it didn't affect the important military affairs. Li Hanlin glanced at the new recruit beside him and had a whole new level of respect for him. This guy was called Lu Do, a weird-looking man with double pupils. Not long after he joined their ranks, he had 3 Beimang barbarians' heads hanging from his horse's back. One could imagine how powerful he was. Originally, the crossbowmen led by Li Hanlin didn't like this bad-tempered new recruit. However, after fighting side by side with him, even the one behind him who had beaten and scolded Lu Dou Li October had to admit that he was wrong. This old man with the surname Li was a third-rank general in Bailiang. In the whole of Bailiang, he could be considered to be someone who could do whatever he wanted. His parents and uncles were all illiterate. When he was born, his parents made a big fuss over his name. They invited countless famous scholars, but none of them were satisfied with his name. Later, the old man slapped his thigh and said that he should be called Lu Dou since he was born in Bailiang. As a result, the entire illiterate family didn't have any objections. The scholars who helped him with the name were all silent. Chapter 460. Most of the crossbowmen in Li Hanlin's team were young masters like October Li, although most of them were not as prominent as October Li, but they were not willing to talk about the glory of their father's family, so October Li became an isolated outlier and was very unlikable. When Lu Dou, a commoner from a concubine family, entered the team, he had a conflict with October Li on the same day. At that time, Li Hanlin and the others were indifferent and did not take sides with either side. When they saw Lu Dou's cowardly attitude, they rolled their eyes and thought that no matter how useless he was to become a crossbowman, he should at least have some backbone. Unexpectedly, when he fought with the crows who had long been famous for their fierceness, with real swords and spears, Lu Dou, a taciturn man, killed 3 crows without saying a word and even blocked a tricky arrow for October Li. Li Hanlin also had a higher opinion of October Li. Although October Li still had some of his foppish habits, it was not too much. Compared to the descendants of the Northern Liang generals who did not even dare to enter the Northern Liang army, let alone become crossbowmen, October Li was really 1,000 times more promising. At this time, October Li was joking with the crossbowmen, saying that when he was young he always fought with his brothers at home. His father had heard from somewhere that there was strength in numbers and wanted him to break chopsticks. However, he was so strong that he broke more than 10 chopsticks in one go. His father, who could not explain the reason, was so angry that he invited a real martial arts instructor instead of making him play with words. Li Hanlin thought that October Li was really lucky. At this time, October Li was joking with the crossbowmen, saying that he always fought with his brothers when he was young. Li Hanlin was amused when he heard Li October say that making him study was worse than being stabbed. He felt the same way and his mood became better. When Brother Feng said that he should join the army, it was indeed a good thing. However, this good brother of His Royal Highness probably did not expect that he would become a crossbowman. Li October rode up from behind and said with a smile, "Brother Hanlin, can I borrow the barbarian's head when we enter the city? It's just so I can show off." Li Hanlin laughed and scolded, "Go borrow it from Lu Dou. That brat cut off 3 heads and I only have 1. What will you do if I lend it to you?" Li October said helplessly, "I just lowered my head and apologized to him. I don't have the face to borrow from him. Besides, both of our surnames are Li. We were a family 500 years ago." Li Hanlin yelled, "Lu Dou, October Li wants to borrow a barbarian's head from you to show off. Do you want to lend it to me?" Lu Dou said calmly, "Not a single one." October Li had a bitter expression on his face. Even the bid leaders and deputy bid leaders burst into laughter. The corners of Lu Dou's mouth twitched as he said indifferently, "I'll lend you too." October Li turned his horse around and wanted to hug this cold-faced but warm-hearted guy. "Lu Dou, you'll be my brother after this. When we reach Lingzhou, I'll take you to visit all the brothels." Li Hanlin teased, "What's the big deal about visiting a brothel? Don't you have a younger sister who's always praised as a captivating beauty? Why don't you just acknowledge him as your brother-in-law? In the future you can even borrow 200 barbarian heads, let alone 2. October Li said heroically, "Sure, Lu Dou. Why don't we agree on this?" Lu Dou rolled his eyes and said, "Get lost. With your shabby appearance, how good can your sister be?" October Li, who didn't look ugly at all, was instantly annoyed and caused another round of hearty laughter. The bid leader said, "A bunch of brats. You still have the energy to talk nonsense here. Don't you know how to vent your energy on the bellies of your women later? I see that your trip this time wasn't bad. When we return to the city, I'll shamelessly ask for a leave from General Zhao and let you guys enjoy yourselves. However, it'll only be for a day or 2 at most. If anyone dares to come to the camp late by even a moment, I'll personally whip you." Li Hanlin came to the bid leader's side and said softly, Bid leader, I've already discussed with Hong Jin and the others. We'll each give a barbarian's head to the 3 brothers. As for the reward, it'll all be given to their families. The bid leader frowned and said, it's a serious crime to give away military merits without authorization. Li Hanlin, I know your background isn't ordinary and isn't inferior to October Li and the others. However, if the higher-ups find out about this, the military law will be like a mountain. A happy occasion will become a disaster. Do you really dare? Li Hanlin said with a mischievous smile. Back then, Chief Biao dared to stab a northern Meng general to death with a single blade. Just how heroic was that? We are all pawns you brought out, so why wouldn't we dare? The bid leader cursed and said with a gratified smile, you guys don't need to get involved. I've already discussed this with the 2 deputy bids. You guys have no part in this. You just need to focus on killing the enemy and accumulating military merits. Since you've entered our ranks, I and the 2 deputy bids have no reason to treat you unfairly. In the Bailiang army. A day's worth of comrades, a lifetime's worth of brothers. On Mount Wudong the morning bell rang. On the summit of the 81 peaks, in the square in front of the main peak's Taoist temple. When Marshal Grand Uncle Qing became the chief, he was the one who led the practice. However, the chief was no longer in this world. Someone else was in charge of the practice, but he was just as young. Li Yufu was only 1 generation younger than the chief Hong, but he was even younger. The summit was filled with smoke. Hundreds of Wudong Taoists practiced together. Their robes fluttered in the wind and clouds surged. The 108 styles created by the young chief were simplified into 72 styles by Marshal Grand Uncle Li Yufu. Not only did they not lose the essence of Taoism, but they also became more complete. Even a Taoist child who just came up the mountain could do the same without any difficulty. After Wudong closed the mountain, only pilgrims were allowed to enter the mountain to burn incense. The Taoist temple on the mountain didn't care about the height of the peak. The Taoists on the mountain didn't care about their seniority. As long as they were willing, they could practice with Li Yufu twice a day. Those who arrived early could stand in the front row. Senior Marshal Grand Uncle Song Jiming and Yu Xingrui could casually stand in the back row if they arrived later. Regardless of wind and rain, they practiced on the summit for a day without rest. After the practice, Li Yufu and some young Taoists patiently explained their doubts. Master Yu Xingrui, who had been quietly waiting, walked to the little lotus peak and came to the tortoise camel tablet. The old Taoist, whose inner strength was only inferior to big senior martial brother Wang Zhonglo, said with emotion, Yufu, do you blame your martial grand uncle Hong for not leaving ancestor Lu's sword to you but giving it to the outsider Xianxia? And this person is a Taoist from the Taoist mansion of Dragon Tiger Mountain. Li Yufu put his hands in the cuffs of his Taoist robe and smiled. When Martial Grand Uncle taught me this set of boxing, he had already made it clear that he would give ancestor Lu's sword to Dragon Tiger Mountain's Xianxia. He also asked me if I had any worries. Yufu didn't dare to lie, so I told him the truth. Martial Grand Uncle said that if you were not convinced, then you could go to Xianxia and ask for it back if you were to surpass Martial Grand Uncle Wang. But I'll tell you in advance that I'll practice swordsmanship halfway. But if I don't have any achievements in the future, you can't laugh at me. Yu Xingrui walked to the edge of the cliff and stepped on the soft soil. He smiled and said, if you don't succeed in practicing swordsmanship, you can't let us laugh at you, can we? Back then, except for the eldest senior brother who cultivated the big yellow court and Wang Xiaoping who practiced the silent sword, the rest of us were useless. The only fun we had was to laugh at your martial granduncle. When we found out that he was reading the forbidden book, we laughed and scolded him. When he dozed off while riding the green ox, we scolded him with a few words of wisdom. Thinking of the red clothes he wore in his youth, we laughed and mocked him. Today it was not good to go down the mountain for fortune-telling. We old men couldn't help laughing again. In fact, as time went on, your martial granduncle and I felt that it was better not to go down the mountain. What's the point of going down the mountain after becoming the best in the world? But in the end, your martial granduncle still went down the mountain. Yu Xingrui sighed and said in a low voice, riding an ox and reading Daoist books, rowing a waterfall with peach trees, watching the clouds rise and fall among the peaks, let nature take its course. This should be your martial granduncle's way of heaven. But riding a crane down the mountain, cutting fate with a sword and letting a woman ascend, how can he let nature take its course? If I was there at that time, I would have pulled his ear and scolded him. We old men are not regretting whether Wudong will prosper or not, we just feel sorry for him. Li Yufu murmured, a white-haired person sending off a black-haired person. Yu Xingrui sighed heavily and said with a smile, so you don't have to torment yourself anymore and don't have any burden. Regarding the matter of Sect Master's junior brother, don't look at how those martial uncles appear to be calm and collected these days. I reckon that they were all in a daze when they were eating. Fortunately, my junior brother Wang wasn't on the mountain. Otherwise, there's an 80 to 90% chance that he would have made a move to stop Xiang's flying sword from opening the heavenly court. And your martial grand uncle Song, he can't calm down to practice alchemy for a year. He is very worried. Li Yufu asked softly, is the sect leader the reincarnation of ancestor Lu and also the reincarnation of Qi Xuanzhen? Yu Xingrui smiled, it's probably true. Who cares? Yu Xingrui patted the shoulder of this disciple who personally came from Donghai to Wudong Mountain and said softly, you have the temperament of the sect leader. It's a blessing to be able to eat and sleep. Li Yufu scratched his head and said awkwardly, when His Royal Highness came up the mountain, sect leader could still suppress this young master. I'm afraid I could only be beaten. Yu Xingrui laughed and said, don't listen to the nonsense of those little Daoists. Your uncle master was also beaten and scolded by the crown prince. When the crown prince went up the mountain to practice his saber skills, your uncle master was bullied quite a bit. Luckily he was able to find joy in his suffering. The few of us were just gloating. Li Yufu was stunned. Yu Xingrui pointed to the scenery outside the peak and smiled sincerely. The sect leader's junior brother stepped into celestial phenomenon here, and also became an earth immortal here. It's just a matter of one step. Li Yufu came back to his senses and said softly, it seems like one step but it's already thousands of steps. Chapter 461. Yu Xingrui nodded, that's right. When you are wholeheartedly seeking Tao, you don't know how many steps you've taken. Only when you forget yourself can you have the opportunity to step into Tao. As for how to forget yourself, Master is inflexible and inflexible. He doesn't dare to mislead others, but at least he knows one thing. He works hard every day, but he doesn't forget to calculate how many steps he has taken. This is also where junior brother is wiser than us. I don't seek Tao, but Tao comes naturally. Li Yufu nodded, Tao can't be Tao. Wonderful beyond words. Yu Xingrui slowly left the top of Little Lotus Peak. He glanced back at his disciple who was talking to the green ox and smiled. Since junior brother was Lu Zhu, his last words were equivalent to Lu Zhu's own words. When Wudong thrives, Yufu thrives. Jing'an Palace. It was said that Princess Pei was focused on meditation and didn't show up for a long time. The already deserted palace became even more desolate. The sky was cloudy but not rainy. It was cold but not cold, as if a woman wanted to say something. The king of Jing and Zhao Heng, who spent half his life in the capital and half in Xiangfan, sat under the eaves of the temple, gently twirling a string of agarwood prayer beads wrapped around his hand. There was only one person sitting opposite to this great vassal king. It was Lu Su, the young and blind zither player who stabbed himself in the eyes to end his career. He came from a scholarly family and his father's generation were great scholars. However, because he wrote the history of West Chu with a straight pen, the younger generation took advantage of the loophole and was punished by the imperial court. For 10 years he played the zither for a famous prostitute in a brothel to make a living. For 10 years he made a living by gambling in Yongzi Alley. Somehow his luck changed. Not only did he enter Jing'an Palace, but he also became an important advisor of the father and son. Even today the young people who were brought into the imperial family from Yongzi Alley still felt like it was a lifetime ago. As the saying goes, a carp jumps over the dragon gate. Thousands of carps fight until their heads bleed, but how many can jump over the dragon gate? Lu Su, who was a criminal, was favored by the king of Jing, Zhao Heng. It was really unexpected. Zhao Heng closed his eyes and turned the prayer beads on his horse to calm his mind. He asked indifferently, Lu Su, do you know why I did not allow you to enter the capital with shower? The blind young man shook his head. I don't know. King of Jing'an opened his eyes and looked at the dusky sky. He laughed and said, these days I made you conceal your surname and identity and move you around to become a low-ranking government official. Have you ever complained? Lu Su shook his head and smiled. Lu Su is very content. Zhao Heng turned his head to look at the young scholar. You've come up with 2 strategies and 13 strategies. You're determined to pacify the world for the emperor. The first strategy is to establish the crown prince, the temple oracle, and the removal of the feudal vassals. Xianxia was trembling with fear and was forced by me to bring him to the capital to meet a stranger, incurring the wrath of the emperor. The second strategy is a total of 10 strategies. It only talks about the strategy of using troops to deal with Beimang. The first is to talk about the 2 surnames of Beimang and the 2 dynasties in the north and south. The second is to predict the intention of Beimang to divide their troops. The third is to talk about how to deal with the enemy's attack. The fourth is to prepare horses for the border. The fifth is to mobilize troops and generals. The sixth is to talk about Tu Liao. The seventh is to reconcile with Qin. The eighth is to give away fortune. The ninth is to reclaim Longyao Prefecture. And the 10th is to eliminate Beimang. The emperor was furious again. However, Xianxia sent a secret letter back to Xiangfan, saying that even Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang attached great importance to it. Even the old West Chu's grand preceptor, who usually didn't like to praise others, said a few good words in the imperial court. Of these 3 people, Zhang Julu chose to give away fortune to promote righteousness, to pave the way for his own political reform. Gu Jiantang favored the 9th strategy of reclaiming Longyao Prefecture greatly. Meanwhile, Sun Shiji, who was in charge of the province under the sect, even more so accepted the 2 strategies and 13 strategies. Once he praised the 2 strategies, these fellows standing in the main hall all felt ashamed of their inferiority, calling my impostor Xianxia a great talent in managing the world and helping the people, not the least bit inferior to Grand Secretary Zhang. Zhang Julu was unexpectedly not the least bit angry. Xiao Yan's words were not only not inferior, it was already difficult for him to look up to him. Only then did he suppress the anger on his majesty's face. In reality, this king understands clearly that of these 2 strategies and 13 strategies, apart from the matter of appointing a crown prince, which violated his reverse scale and made him truly angry, the other 12 strategies, especially the strategy of removing vassals, simply hit the bottom of his heart. Towards this elder brother, this king truly understands him too well. The blind man quietly said, Lu Su's original intention was to wait a few more years, when the dust of the 7th war between the 2 dynasties had settled, before handing over these 2 strategies and 13 strategies. King of Jing and Zhao Heng stopped turning the prayer beads. Lu Su lowered his head a bit. Zhao Heng laughed and said, You are worthy of being called an intelligent person. This king has killed countless idiots. In this lifetime, only you and a youngster were able to see that this king would press the prayer beads before killing people. But don't worry, I can't bear to kill you. If I did, half of the Jing'an palace would collapse. This time my killing intent surged only because of my gloomy nature. I don't really want to kill you. This king can't wait until the 7th war is over. He is afraid that he will lose the bet. Wuxia, you are a smart person. Can you guess the meaning of this king's words? Lu Xuan clenched his teeth, got up and knelt down. He said in a low voice, If our dynasty loses, the 13 strategies can still benefit Jing'an Palace. But if we win, they will become 2 pieces of useless paper. In this way, His Royal Highness will have no chance of being passed down from generation to generation. Zhao Heng laughed and said, Get up and talk. Lu Su got up and sat down again. Zhao Heng said softly, This king has always been unlucky in gambling. Back then, in that big gamble, he lost the world. That's why he asked Xiao Song to move to the capital. It's just a small gamble. People say that small bets are good for the mood. He thinks he can win. Lu Su suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Zhao Heng continued to turn the prayer beads and said with a smile, You thought of it? That's right. If this king doesn't die or slowly dies of old age, this gamble, even if I, Zhao Heng, win, it will be useless. Xiao won't be able to become king of Jing'an. He will only be demoted by 1 rank and demoted to a duke. Lu Su knelt down again. Was it fun to indirectly kill a duke who had no illness and no disaster? How many lives did a mere aide like Lu Su have? Zhao Heng got up and said, Don't kneel. This king only wants 1 person to kneel in front of him. Who is that person? You and I both know it. Of course it won't be you. Prince Jing'an personally helped the blind young man from the estate up. He smiled amiably and said, Back then that person relied on the scholar Sun Ping, who could be considered a peerless scholar, to achieve what he has today. With you, father and son, presumably we won't be too far behind. Scope. You've seen the splendor of Jing'an Palace. This king will take you to see some filthy things. Lu Su was brought by the king of Jing and Zhao Heng to a secluded private house in the city. After getting out of the carriage, the king of Jing'an, who was the most proficient in both the pen and the sword, revealed an imperceptible bitter smile. Zhao Heng gently pushed the door open and entered. The small courtyard was filled with orchids. A woman was lazily leaning against the wooden railing under the eaves. She was graceful and refined. Zhao Heng said indifferently, "When ordinary people see this woman in the courtyard, they will most likely mistake her for Pei Nanwei." When Lu Su heard this, he was stunned for a moment. After confirming that the woman in the courtyard was not the Princess Jing'an Pei Nanwei, he was shocked by Crown Prince Zhao Sun's rebellious behavior. For someone as rich as His Royal Highness, it was normal for him to keep a mistress in a golden house. Even if he had a crown prince consort and kept a beautiful woman, no one would see it as rebellious. However, when this woman looked too much like a crown prince consort, it was somewhat shocking. Lu Su immediately understood why the king of Jing and Zhao Heng would say that it was a filthy thing. He looked down and no longer looked at the beautiful woman who was in a daze. The woman finally woke up. When she saw Zhao Heng, who looked 70 to 80% similar to Zhao Heng, she immediately knelt down. Her delicate body trembled and she couldn't say a word. Zhao Heng slowly walked to her side and reached out to hold a string of wind chimes under the eaves. He didn't say anything. The woman's face was covered in tears. After trembling for a long time, she raised her head and bit her lip until it bled. She said, "I'm not afraid of death, but I beg the king of Jing and not to punish His Royal Highness." Zhao Heng released the wind chimes and gently flicked them. They jingled. He didn't lower his head to look at the woman who was crawling on the floor. He sneered softly, "Are you worthy of speaking to this king?" The woman lowered her head and tears streamed down her face. The king of Jing'an listened to the sound of the wind chimes and slowly said, "This king already knew from the first day you stepped into the courtyard. However, this scandal is nothing to this king. Su-er didn't cross the line." The woman was still trembling like a delicate orchid in the wind and rain. Zhao Heng continued, "Now for Su-er, you have to die. Are you willing?" The king of Jing'an and Lu Su walked out of the courtyard. Before Zhao Heng boarded the carriage, he paused and laughed softly. "This king treats you like a scholar." Lu Su, who didn't speak, bowed deeply. The woman waited until the sound of the door closing. She wiped away her tears and went to the jewelry box to choose a pearl hairpin that Zhao Sun had given her. She came under the eaves and lay on the floor with him. She raised her head and looked at the wind chimes. Before the hairpin pierced her neck, she said softly, "Sun." When the king of Jing'an's crown prince, Zhao Sun, was in the capital, there was a piece of news that shook the world. The king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, died of a chronic illness. Princess Jing'an Pei Nanwei committed suicide. The news spread to the capital. It was rumored that the crown prince Zhao Sun vomited blood and fainted. That day the emperor's grace was vast and mighty. The emperor decreed that Zhao Sun was to be the king of Jing'an. Among the 7 vassal kings, he was the second to be granted a hereditary title. However, he was the first to become a vassal king, His Royal Highness. After Zhao Sun thanked the emperor in the palace, he quickly returned to Xianxia city. After meeting Lu Su, he put on mourning clothes. In the dead of night, Zhao Sun, who was about to become the new vassal king of the dynasty, sat alone in the morning hall. He expressionlessly threw a handful of yellow paper into the brazier. After the mourning period was over, Zhao Jia, who was now Prince Jing'an, had his maidservants wait on him and put on his official robe. He dismissed the servants and stood in the room with his hands clutching his face. His expression was twisted and sinister, as if he was crying but not crying, as well as smiling but not smiling. He covered his face and lowered his head in tears. If there was someone watching, His Royal Highness would have an incomprehensible expression at this moment. It was a pity that the new noble Lu Su could only stand outside the door. Moreover, he was blind. Inside the room was the king of Jing and Zhao Sun. He covered his face and the corners of his mouth curled up. The capital. When a woman marries into the imperial family, no matter what her previous status was, she would have no choice. Chapter 462. When Yan Dongwu saw her younger brother Yan Qiji and Kong Wuqi visiting together, no matter how bad her mood was, it still improved. Moreover, she was married to the refined and introverted fourth prince. Although this husband of the emperor's son was a bit too playful and was obsessed with poetry, painting and musical instruments for a woman, it was already a heavenly wealth that she could not complain about. After the two became husband and wife, they treated each other with respect. Yan Dongwu didn't know what reason he had to be unhappy. Therefore, every time the stewards and maids of the Fu saw the imperial concubine, they always felt close and kind. They secretly praised her for being a daughter of a noble family. The bit of misgivings they had about their mistress being born in Baoyang was swept away. Yan Dongwu was knowledgeable, and it was clear that the fourth prince was very satisfied with this marriage. In the past, he did not socialize much with those disreputable friends of second and third rank officials. Today, together with Yan Dongwu, he received his brother-in-law Yan Qiji and Kong Wuqi, who was a little famous in the capital. The fourth prince had always been known for not putting on airs. Today, when he received two people of the same age, he gave them enough face. He personally served tea and water and laughed and joked with his bookish brother-in-law. What was even more rare was that after the pleasantries, he took the initiative to find an excuse to leave, leaving the imperial concubine to chat privately with the two. In the past, Yan Dongwu loved the house and its crow and hated the house and its crow. His impression of Kong Wuqi was not very good. After the family moved to the capital, he talked a few times with the sturdy but simple-minded Kong Wuqi and found it difficult to dislike him. Especially his younger brother, who was not on good terms with the group of young masters in the capital and often suffered losses. It was always Kong Wuqi who had a good relationship with the second prince, who led people to get back at him. In addition, the Yan and Kong families were rare scholarly families in Baoyang. In the capital, which was very xenophobic, they inevitably helped each other. Yan Dongwu and his younger brother talked about some personal things, and some simple principles that one had to be clever when working in the capital's yamen. Kong Wuqi did not speak much and only sat upright and still on the side, foolishly happy. From beginning to end, the three did not mention that name. Leaving the luxurious and grand mansion, the fourth prince still politely escorted him to the door. Yan Qiji and Kong Wuqi sat in the carriage together. Kong Wuqi asked innocently, "Yan eating chicken, your sister seems to hate His Royal Highness. Look, she doesn't even want to talk about it." Yan Qiji's face darkened as he said softly, "None of this matters now." Kong Wuqi said straightforwardly, "Hey, I used to think that Brother Feng could become your brother-in-law. At that time I regretted that I didn't have an elder sister. I was so jealous of you." After a period of official cultivation, Yan Qiji, who had gradually lost his sharpness as a scholar, changed the topic and said with a bitter smile, "I heard that Hanlin went to the Baoyang army. This guy really likes to do stupid things." Kong Wuqi said unhappily, "How is this a stupid thing? If a man doesn't go to the battlefield to kill the enemy, how can he still be considered a man?" Yan Qiji glared at him. Kong Wuqi curled his lips and muttered, "You're not a man." Yan Qiji gave him a kick. Kong Wuqi, who was not afraid of pain, was too lazy to hit him. He looked out the window and sighed, "I really miss Brother Feng. No matter how much green ant wine I drink, it doesn't work. I just feel that it's boring. It's not the same taste as before." Yan Qiji said helplessly, "You're a man now?" Kong Wuqi hugged Yan Qiji's neck and played around. In the mansion, everyone knew that the prince's wife had raised an expensive parrot that was clumsy in speech. It hung on the window of the study. Yan Dongwu stood at the window and only dared to tell the parrot what was on his mind. The fourth prince saw this scene from a distance in the corridor. He leaned against the pillar with his hands behind his head and muttered to himself. The current dynasty followed the ancient rules of the previous dynasty. The high officials of the three provinces under the Minister of Governmental Affairs had to take turns on night duty in their respective headquarters. Other than the old Grand Preceptor of the Old West Chu, Sun Shiji, there was no exception. Today, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu received a report from a direct official in the main hall. He signed on it and took it away, returning it the next morning. The direct official was also used to this and did not flatter or flatter. Before this powerful blue-eyed man became the Grand Secretary, the central government officials took night duty as a hardship. Very few second-rank officials really followed this rule, especially those with noble status. They rarely showed up, and the official in charge of the report did not dare to say much. However, after Zhang Julu took power, he expelled a few men from the imperial court on his first night duty. No one dared to slack off anymore. Following the dynasty's peace in the Four Seas, there was a reputation for the forbidden night to settle the world. Tonight on duty, after Zhang Julu dealt with a few urgent affairs, he and an old friend of the same master, the Left Chancellor of the Imperial College Huanwen, were on duty. Zhang Julu did not drink. In the hearts of all the scholars, Huanwen, who was as respected as the chancellor of the Shangyin Academy, was not happy without wine. Even the emperor made an exception and allowed Huanwen to drink at night, but explicitly said that he was not allowed to get drunk. The left chancellor of the Imperial College was a thin and elegant old man. He joked, "Old blue-eyed man, your complexion is not bad." What? The 2 sketches and 13 strategies King of Jing'an and His Royal Highness Zhou Xian invited an expert to write on their behalf. Are you really treating them as a world-saving medicine? Grand Secretary Zhang narrowed his eyes and said, "Poison is like honey, good medicine is bitter." These 13 strategies, once implemented, will at least make most of the imperial court's officials complain incessantly. Even the military will suffer great losses. Tell me, how can I not be happy? Huanwen reached out his hand and pointed at his old friend who was only under him, cursing. The first sketches is a strategy in the temple. Even the Imperial College is insinuating that we are a bunch of useless scholars who don't know the hardships of the common people and only know how to study to death for scholarly achievements. I'm still fine since my skin is thick, not scared of being spat on by others, but the newly appointed Chancellor Song, you will definitely be angered badly. Zhang Julu sneered and said, "That literary giant with good handwriting, fortunately, only went to your Imperial College. Now that I've met him, he can still be considered a smiling face. If he went to the Secretariat or the Minxiao province, I would still have a headache, unable to escape from becoming a political enemy of his." Huanwen chuckled and said, "This Song family father and son pair is a great literary giant who is going to dominate the literary world for 100 years. Old blue-eyed man, you should take it easy. If they hold a grudge against you, just wait for them to splash dirty water on you after you die." The blue-eyed purple-bearded Grand Secretary Zhang stooped down and reached out to warm himself by the fire, calmly saying, "Pen knife, pen knife, pen knife. A pen is a knife, killing people without spilling blood. In my opinion, he isn't inferior to Great General Gu Jiantang." Huanwen drank a small mouthful of wine, narrowing his eyes and lowering his voice, saying, "The Green Party has already fallen apart, but the Gongnamdu Lu family brothers, one has become the Minister of Rights, the other has become the Assistant Minister of War. The atmosphere is gradually rising. Aren't you nervous?" Grand Secretary Zhang said indifferently, "What's the point of being nervous about these things? I am only worried about things like drought, floods, locusts and other things." Huanwen shook his head, not saying anything. He only feared natural disasters, not man-made disasters. With the officials in power, what more could he ask for? Insignia Mountain's Great Bull Mound, the 2 great guest elders Huang Fangfua and Hong Yu personally watched as that mountain lord woman placed a single hand on the head of a guest elder kneeling on the ground whose inner force wasn't ordinary, absorbing the aura of this man who was still a powerful martial artist a moment ago, not leaving a single drop behind. When she released her hand, that guest elder's body and blood essence didn't change, but his life force was already extinguished. The 2 guest elders who secretly captured this person to help the tyrant smiled at each other, their faces full of bitterness and horror. Even though they had already seen this scene many times, each time her absorption speed became faster and faster. The faster the mountain guest elder died, the more terrified they became. The woman who became Xinyuan family's master asked with a smile, Uncle Huang, what number is this?" Huang Fangfua steadied his mind, doing his best to remain calm as he said, 39th. It was precisely Xinyuan Qingfeng who had brazenly ascended to this position during the Great Snow Plains upheaval. She bent down her slender waist, looking at that corpse that died with remaining grievances, her smile as innocent as a young girl's, saying with a smile, "Two uncles, please be at ease. No matter how vicious Qingfeng's heart is, I still won't act against you two, my father's good friends." Huang Fangfua said softly, "My only wish is for Miss to reach the pinnacle of martial arts as soon as possible." Xinyuan Qingfeng retracted her gaze and stretched her body. Not only was her face glowing, but there were also wisps of purple qi lingering around her body. She said faintly, "If my father were still alive, he would never say such words. Perhaps he would regard me, his own daughter, as a devil that could be killed, and would no longer be willing to release a jar of red osmanthus wine for me every year." Huang Fangfua didn't dare to say anything else. Hong Yu crossed his arms and began to close his eyes to rest. Xinyuan Qingfeng frowned and asked, "If I'm not mistaken, Yuan Tingshan must have somehow obtained Xinyuan Pan's martial arts experience, and his blade technique realm skyrocketed." Otherwise, with his temperament, he would never compete with Gu Jiantang. On the other hand, our neighbor of Mount Hui, a young Taoist from the Taoist master residence with the surname Ning, on Mount Longhu, was able to block the sword of the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. Compared to these two men, who's better? Also, during the Buddhist debate on the Golden Lotus Peak, a man with the surname Zhao brought a bald woman. Not only did she discuss Zen with Li Dongxin, she was also said to be the second person in the Vajra realm other than the white-robed monk. When can I be compared to her? Huang Fengfu didn't dare to speak nonsense, so he shook his head and said, "It's hard to say." Xianyuan Qingfeng suddenly smiled and said, "Let's not bother about these troublesome matters. Oh right, there's an old saying that rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. It's not appropriate to always act against the guest elders on the mountain. I'll have to trouble the two uncles to go to the Jianghu and catch some martial artists. What do you think?" Without waiting for Huang Fengfu to speak, Hong Piao opened his eyes and bowed, saying, "I'm going down the mountain today." Xianyuan Qingfeng waved his hand, and the barefoot woman walked to the left side of the spacious main hall by the cliff. The mountain wind whistled and her sleeves fluttered. She slowly walked back to her boudoir and put on yellow flowers in front of the mirror. After drawing her eyebrows and putting on makeup, she held the bronze mirror with one hand and pointed at the person in the mirror with the other. She laughed inexplicably and said, "What an ugly woman." The northern Liang mansion had silently lost a man and a woman, who seemed to be dispensable. One of them was Murong Tong Huang, who wore the skin of a transcendent god and headed north. The other was Xu Xiu, who headed south. And Su Fengyan, who was alone, slowly headed north again after leaving Flying Fox City. Chapter 463. There were as many horse gangs at the border as locusts, but once they entered the hinterland of northern Mang, their numbers quickly decreased. Using wooden sword when Hua's words, His Highness the Crown Prince was very depressed at the moment. Only in the turmoil of war could people be forced into prostitution and become bandits. If the world was too peaceful, who would be willing to tie their heads to their belts and become bandits? This showed that northern Mang's territory was far from the so-called poverty of the people as described by scholars and celebrities. After seeing that Flying Fox City was as prosperous as the south, Su Fengyan became even more worried. Even if he was subtly influenced by the evil habits of the people left behind by the spring and autumn period, how many years would it take to soften a northern Mang that was as valiant as a strong man into a weak woman like the southern Tang? 30 years, 50 years, 100 years? How could Bailiang afford to wait? Su Fengyan rode his horse to the north, studying the swimming fish style on the 7th page of the knife manual. Because he could not understand the essence, he did not look at the 8th page. Other than the 12 sword cultivation methods, he occasionally rode his sword to kill snakes and scorpions. He repeatedly practiced the sword chi rolling dragon wall, which seemed to have the same effect as the rolling knife skill. Under the cool moonlight hundreds of miles away, he howled and cursed without any scruples. He cursed the old emperor Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang, and countless emperors, generals and ministers, and also missed many people and many things. Unfortunately, there was no little girl Tao Manwu to help him relax his frowning brows. On this day the scorching sun was still scorching hot. If not for the great yellow court, even breathing would be like drinking scalding hot tea. Walking in the desert, the water sac would dry up. This seemed to be a type of ascetic cultivation. Su Fengyan was reluctant to ride an inferior horse that was not suitable for the hot weather, so he followed old Huang's example and led the horse. His ears twitching, Su Fengyan walked to the top of a yellow sand slope and looked into the distance. He could vaguely see blurry figures under the scorching sun. 2 people were galloping over. Probably because they saw Su Fengyan, they suddenly changed their course and galloped over. Su Fengyan smiled. He finally bumped into horse thieves. This had nothing to do with his eyesight. It was just that these 2 young horse thieves were too obvious. Their upper bodies were bare and they wore hemp breeches, revealing their lame dragon and tiger tattoos. They were only short of tattooing the word bandit on their faces. When they saw Su Fengyan, their eyes lit up. These 2 did not seem to be in a hurry to kill him and rob him. They whispered to each other. Su Fengyan's ears were sharp. After he heard what they said, he laughed involuntarily. They were not robbing him but robbing him. It seemed that the leader of the horse thieves was a female hero who was somewhat in love. She let the horse thieves under her command snatch a handsome man with soft skin and tender flesh, and it would be best if he could read and write to be her wife. The two horse thieves obviously did not think much of him. They muttered that he had thin arms and legs and would not be able to withstand a few blows from the chief. Although he was quite fair, if such a pretty boy stood together with the chief, wouldn't they become the black and white evils? If the chief took him out to drink with the other chiefs, it would be too embarrassing. The two horse thieves saw Su Fengyan was scared silly, but the horse thieves did not move. They became more and more speechless. Was this pretty boy a fool? In the past, when nomadic grassland herdsmen met by chance to raise livestock, even if they were not scared out of their wits, they were very vigilant when they saw them. However, this boy in front of them was foolishly holding the horse without moving. One of the horse thieves with a black tiger tattoo could not stand it anymore. He rode up the slope, pointed at the pretty boy with a horsewhip and scolded in a rough voice, "Are you in a hurry to be reincarnated?" Su Fengyan turned a blind eye to the horsewhip pointing at him. He smiled and said, "I want to buy some water with you two brothers." The tiger-tattooed horse thief was stunned for a moment and lashed out with his horsewhip. Su Fengyan held the horsewhip and pulled down the horse thief who had hurt him. He kicked out with more dexterity than brute force. The horse thief's back hit the horse's back. Together with the horse, they flew out of the yellow sand slope. The tattooed horse thief was stunned. Su Fengyan took down the shriveled water sack and floated down to the bottom of the slope. He did not look at the struggling horse thief. The horse thief's horse was a good horse. He jumped up and shook the dust off his mane. Su Fengyan took the horse thief's water sack and put it into his own water sack. He then took a straw hat and did not argue with the two horse thieves. He whistled and slowly went away with the horse. When Su Fengyan was far away, the tiger-tattooed horse thief who had been crying for his parents, quickly sat up and rubbed his chest. In fact, it was only a slight pain and nothing serious. He said to the tiger-tattooed horse thief with a lingering fear, "I met a tough nail." The other horse thief clicked his tongue and said, "The pretty boy is actually hiding his strength. The boss will definitely like him." The tiger-tattooed horse thief quickly got on his horse and said, "Let's go and talk to the boss." Su Fengyan led his horse and traveled alone in the wilderness. According to the Bailiang Palace's geography book, he would be able to see the grassland in a few days' time. He believed that there would be a chance to meet the herdsman who lived by the water and grass. He was fine with it, but the poor horse beside him was a little tired because he often walked in the desert. He thought that when they reached the grassland, it would be best if his old friend could blend in with the wild horses. So he took off the saddle and reins and let it go. After resting for the night, Su Fengyan sat cross-legged, lit a bonfire and looked at the low starry sky. The poor horse also bent its knees and rested, rubbing its neck against him. Su Fengyan patted the horse's neck, picked up a piece of soil and put it into his mouth to chew. The moisture was much better. It was time to get close to the grassland. Tasting soil was the entry skill of finding the dragon's pulse. Su Fengyan often went with his elder brother Yao Jian to study geography when he was young and learned many superficial tricks of looking for pulse. The world's ancestral dragons came out of Kunlun, and one of them entered Beimang. In the past, Beimang rarely talked about this. After a large number of adherents of the spring and autumn period, this talk became popular. The Empress of Beimang had become the destined son of heaven. Su Fengyan turned to the poor horse and smiled, "Old friend, do you believe it?" The poor horse snorted. As usual, it diligently cultivated the sword in turn, just like the farmers in Jiangnan who had to go out every night to grab water to raise rice. They could not afford to be lazy. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Su Fengyan quickened his breathing. According to the Taoist classics, the spring meal was the morning glow of the morning and the summer meal was the evening glow of the eastern sea. The evening glow of the morning glow was the beginning of the sun, and the morning glow of the eastern sea was the best. The evening glow of the morning glow was the beginning of the sun, and the morning glow of the eastern sea was the best. The evening glow of the northern sea was the purple chi in the middle of the night, and the extreme cold of the northern sea was the armor. The two were especially beneficial for cultivation. That Taoist orthodoxy lived up to expectations and became the state religion of Beimang. The current leader, Immortal Qilin, became a Taoist saint. Together with the abbot of the two Zen temples, they were known as the two saints of the north and south. In the early morning, Su Fengyan's breathing was red and yellow. It was probably because he had not reached the realm yet. He also could not say that it was very mysterious, but he felt more refreshed than usual. He slowly stood up and had some understanding. The so-called martial arts geniuses were divided into two types. One type had a body that was different from ordinary people like Huang Manor, who was born as a Vajra. Kibbe said that they were blessed by the heavens. The other type had a relatively normal body but they could be felt by the heavens. The bull rider was one of the best among them, and only then could they have the magnificent aura of stepping into the celestial phenomenon. The third type was slightly inferior to the first two, but it was not impossible for them to step into the land of immortals. For example, Li Chungang who entered the Great Tao with the sword, Wang Xinji who proved her Tao with strength, and Dong Tai who connected with the sword. In the path of martial arts, the higher one's realm was, the more one would go against the flow of the heavens. The heaven and earth were both a home and a cage. A martial artist had to form his own system, just like a naughty child who wanted to establish his own school. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the rising sun and muttered to himself, "Good and evil will be rewarded. If you don't believe, raise your head and look. Who will God spare?" Then he twisted his mouth and said, "It's said that good people don't live long but evil people live for 1,000 years. When the ancients spoke reason they liked to slap faces." Su Fengnian turned to look at a poor old monk wearing a kasaya and hemp shoes. His red phoenix eyes, which were sometimes charming and sometimes gloomy, stared straight at this southern Zen monk who had been sitting 10 zhang away last night. Buddhism was divided into Mahayana, and esotericism was divided into yellow and red. Everyone's attire was different. Because Su Fengnian's Wangfei was a devout believer in Buddhism, he always had a good impression of monks. In Beiliang, many rogue Taoists changed professions to become monks for the sake of money. But in Beimeng he met an old monk who had traveled thousands of li to this uncivilized land to preach. Even though the monk looked kind, Su Fengnian did not dare to be careless. The old monk put his palms together and said, "Young master is a believer in Buddhism." Good. Su Fengnian suppressed the murderous instinct in his heart and silently returned the greeting. The old monk's kasaya had been washed many times. It could be seen that there were many fine stitches. But it was always clean and did not look sloppy. His beard and eyebrows were snow white. He held a bamboo staff in his hand and looked even more benevolent. In the Beiliang army, there was once a monk who wielded a staff of more than 70 jin. As one of the commanders of the infantry he ate meat and drank wine. He killed people like flies. On the battlefield he glared fiercely and was very bloodthirsty. He was highly regarded by Su Shao. Unfortunately, because the Beiliang cavalry entered Jianghu, the monk retreated into the mountains. It was said that he passed away in a small mountain temple. At this time the old monk smiled and said, "This old monk came north from the 2 Zen temples to the 2 Zen temples. I wanted to discuss Zen with an old friend from the Taoist school. Although most likely it would be like a chicken talking to a duck, but at least it would be a load off my mind. By chance I saw young master swallowing the moon and eating the red clouds of the sun. I wanted to talk to young master endlessly, but I was afraid young master would misunderstand me as a bad person. So I did not dare to take the initiative to speak. But after thinking about it for a night, I felt that young master's heart is very deep. I don't know how to cultivate it. If I am careless and fall into it, it would be very inappropriate. Since young master is a believer in Buddhism, if you don't mind this old monk being noisy, I can talk to young master about Buddhism." Su Fengnian sat down again. He smiled and said, "So you are an eminent monk of the 2 Zen temples. I sincerely hope Senior will not be stingy with your advice.